Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere you probably didn't expect your dreams to wander, behind the vermilion gates of an imperial Chinese palace, many centuries ago, where the air smells faintly of incense, and the shadows of carved dragons stretch across polished tiles. The chambers are quiet for now, but not for long. You're about to slip into the day of a palace concubine, a life so carefully orchestrated that even boredom has a schedule. You probably won't survive this routine yourself, not because of the grandeur, but because of the sheer patience required just to get through breakfast. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you are right now and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The palace stirs before dawn. You lie there, still half asleep, hearing the faint shuffle of cloth shoes across polished stone. Servants glide through the dim light with bowls of water, steaming towels, and bundles of folded silk. Your chamber smells faintly of sandalwood and chrysanthemums, the scent chosen not because you like it, but because someone hired decided it matched the season. Outside, a gong has sounded, the palace clock of sorts, and you know what it means. Time to begin, whether you want to or not. You rise slowly, pulling on a thin robe, the silk cool against your skin. The stone floor beneath your bare feet feels like ice. Historians still argue whether the palace kept rooms deliberately cold to encourage discipline, or if it was simply poor heating design. Either way, you get used to goosebumps as part of the morning ritual. The first task is face washing with rose water, because apparently water alone is far too plain for a concubine. You lean over the polished bronze basin, watching your reflection ripple in the dim light, and dab carefully. A servant hovers with a towel, embroidered in gold thread that you're not allowed to own but are permitted to use briefly, a small luxury borrowed. Breakfast is a whisper away, but you won't eat just yet. First comes the morning greeting. You and the other women must appear in orderly procession before the senior consort, the ranking lady who rules this miniature empire of silk sleeves. You trudge down the corridor, head lowered slightly, enough to show humility, but not so much that you look like you've just tripped over your own dignity. It's a balance only palace life can teach. The senior consort sits waiting, dressed since before dawn, her hair arranged into a sculpture that probably required half a forest of pins. She glances at each of you, assessing everything, posture, expression, whether your robe is tied correctly. It feels like school inspection, except the report card determines whether you spend the next month in shadow or in sunlight. When your turn comes, you bow gracefully. Your knees ache from practice, but you keep smiling faintly. A polite nod from her means you've passed, at least for today. One of the younger women stumbles slightly in her bow, and the room's air sharpens. Nothing will be said, but everyone files away, noting it silently, storing it for later gossip. Finally, you return to your chamber where a tray awaits. Breakfast. A thin rice porridge flavored with a single pickled plum, and a steamed bun still warm from the kitchen. It isn't a feast, but it's warm, and the steam fogs the cold edge from your fingers. You sip slowly, careful not to leave a drop on your robe. As you eat, you hear distant strings, musicians practicing for the emperor's morning rituals. Somewhere far away, drums echo faintly like a heartbeat in the walls. You remind yourself that while this palace feels like the center of the world, it is also a gilded cage. Once inside, stepping outside again without permission is as unlikely as riding a carp across the sky. The routine is strict and so is the silence, but you feel it beginning already, the slow rhythm of a concubine's day. One moment slips into another, as predictable as the shifting sunbeams across your chamber floor. And though the palace may seem peaceful, you know every whisper, every glance, and every folded sleeve is part of an endless performance. The gong sounds again. Morning has truly begun, and so has your long, quiet journey. You settle on the lacquered stool as the room brightens by inches, like tea steeping to the right shade. The grooming table is an altar to patience. Combs of peachwood laid like ribs, small porcelain jars whose lids click gently, brushes soft as moth wings. A bronze mirror that exaggerates every doubt you've ever had about your eyebrows. You breathe, feel the cool on the floor again. Yes, still an ice rink. And prepare for the marathon that looks suspiciously like sitting very still for hours. Your hair goes first because hair is architecture here and you are the scaffolding. Attendants warm a rinse of fermented rice water until it's just shy of steam and pour slowly along your scalp. The scent is faintly sweet, somewhere between new rice and a memory of rain. Mainstream fact: court women across dynasties prize sleek, glossy hair, and rice water rinses and camellia oil were common tricks to coax shine from stubborn strands. Your maid combs through with a wide-toothed piece of peachwood. 100 strokes, counted softly in the corner like a spell against tangles. You suspect the counting makes no difference, but your scalp tingles gratefully, and frankly, you will take any ritual that involves someone else doing the work. Now the architecture rises. A base knot sits low and stable. From it, strands are drawn, looped, and anchored into shapes with names that sound poetic and mildly dangerous. Falling cloud, twin phoenix, encircling lotus. Each pin is a decision. Silver holds weight. Tortoise shell guides angle. Plain bone keeps secrets. Somewhere in the mess of silk cords and hairpins is a small cushion, a hidden pillow to prop the loops so they defy gravity without defying sense. Historians still argue whether these elaborate structures were everyday expectations for all ranks or reserved for key appearances because portraits lie politely and manuals assume you have 5 spare hours. You, in any case, are very much here, and your neck is learning a new definition of commitment. A tray of ornaments appears. You're not high enough to swim in sapphires, but jasper beads and kingfisher feather inlay flash in the morning light. The feathers, tiny shards of turquoise set in gold, are cool against your hair where the pin touches scalp. A quirky tidbit floats by. Some women stitched scented silk into their hair pads so that when they bowed, a ghost of plum or agarwood drifted past the recipient like an unspoken compliment. You test your bow only a little, and the faintest whiff of plum rises. It's ridiculous and delightful, like a polite joke only your hair understands. Face next, powders passed with the solemnity of an oath. The jar opens to a white as quiet as first snow. You know better than to sneeze while the puff hovers. That was last month, and you paid for it in 3 extra etiquette drills and a week of being called mist of winter with suspicious sweetness. The powder settles, blurring edges, cooling the skin. You ask dryly whether the goal is porcelain or pastry. Your maid does not giggle, but you feel the corner of her mouth falter. A thin wash of rouge follows, safflower mostly, steeped and pressed until it blooms into a soft petal stain along cheek and lip. Mainstream fact tucked gently into the mirror. Fashionable brows change by era. Moth-wing slivers, far-flung crescents, softly arched willow leaves. Today's target is the willow, calm, tapered, a promise of shade over a clear gaze. The brush tickles as it sketches each hair, and you realize how odd it is that power, for you, often begins at the eyebrow. A tiny lacquered box holds Huadian, minute floral forehead ornaments cut from mica and tinted with carmine. You choose one the size of a raindrop and press it between your brows. It catches the light like a thought you're trying to remember. Historians still argue whether the earliest Huadian were worn daily in court or saved for festivals and ceremonies. The paintings are generous, the diaries are stingy, and reality, as usual, probably sat somewhere in the middle, yawning. You keep yours. Who turns down a tiny flower stuck to their face that says, "I made an effort," before you've even spoken? On the side table rests a fan, folded, with ribs carved thin as promises. You open it once, just to test the sound. It whispers. The silk smells faintly of the sachet tucked in your belt, ground sandalwood, dried osmanthus, a hint of clove to sharpen the edges. Perfume here is less cloud and more echo. People aren't meant to notice it first, they're meant to notice it last, when you've turned a corner and the air still remembers you. A needle pokes out from the scent sachet's seam where you mended it yesterday. You pull it free before it introduces itself to your hip later. Joke 1. Palace life offers many needles, few of them threaded with opportunity. Now the nails. You're careful. Long nails are not universal, but in some courts they're little flags of leisure, proof that you do not pound rice or peel turnips or, heaven forbid, button your own cuffs in a hurry. Thin, gold-plated guards clip over your ring and little fingers, their tips arcing like moon slivers. They are impractical in the way swans are impractical, slow, graceful, an argument against urgency. You test a gesture, the guard, a catching light. It says, "I am fragile only because I have time to be." Lips deepen, a second brush of safflower, then a touch of beeswax to seal. Your maid suggests a dot of color just below the lip. Some eras fancied a beauty mark to distract the gaze, like setting a decoy fire to protect the granary. You consider it and decline. Between the forehead flower, the willow brows, and a hair construction sturdy enough to survive a medium wind, you are already an illustrated manuscript. Silk arrives, whisper piled on whisper. First the thin underrobe, cool against powdered skin, then the middle layer that will never be seen but must be precise because invisibility and perfection are close cousins here. The outer robe waits folded like a promise on the stand, sleeve panels as long as small rivers, collar embroidered with a pattern so fine you could drown in it, hems weighted with the smallest lead beads so they fall into grace instead of chaos. As the sleeves slide over your arms, you feel the robe's logic, each layer smoothing the last, each knot hidden, each tuck designed to say effortless while hiding the team effort. Mainstream fact again, gently laid. Rank loves color. Certain shades are licensed. Glossy blues and deep cinnabar may live above your station unless borrowed for festival or performance. You choose a soft celadon touched with plum embroidery because it feels like early spring without asking the sun to sign off on it. A quirky tidbit to entertain the mirror, some ladies stitch tiny mantra strips into their linings, words folded like seeds, not to be read, but to be carried. The belt settles. It anchors everything with a dignity your stomach does not share. You tighten a shade, then loosen in mercy. The knotted ends hang just so. One tassel carries a small jade pendant that tinks against the knot when you walk, a glass bell no one else hears. Headdress check. You tilt your head and it does not move, which is a miracle, or architecture, or both. You test one more bow as shallow as a saucer. The hair holds. Your neck files a complaint with your future self to be addressed at the bathing chamber, preferably with hot water and poems. From the corridor, footsteps. Soft, uniform, the rhythm of other rooms performing the same quiet opera. You are one instrument in a large orchestra, and the conductor is a schedule pinned to a wall you'll never see. The mirror gives you back a person you slightly recognize and slightly don't. The same eyes, but calmer. The same mouth, but rehearsed. Relax, you think. You are a painting that can breathe. The maid blots your cheeks once more, chases an escaping hair back into the cloud, and then steps back, hands folded. Oh, perfect, as she whispers, which in palace grammar means adequate plus luck. You rise carefully. The silk slides down like a sigh. Joke, too, to yourself. If grace burned calories, you would be a warrior by midday. A tray appears with tea, the gentlest green, rinsed once, poured twice. You take a sip and feel the small heat settle into the powder's cool like a truce between seasons. Somewhere, a zither phrase trembles and fades. You collect your fan, your sachet, your courage in that order. Historians still argue whether morning cosmetics were a private indulgence or a semi-public theater, since some accounts place attendants and supervisors in and out of chambers, checking progress like quality control on a silk loom. You decide it is both. It is the hour in which your face becomes a letter sealed before anyone reads it, and of course that invites witnesses. Last checks, shoulders down, spine long, hands relaxed with the thumb resting not quite touching the middle finger, the way etiquette tutorials insist. Your maid lifts the curtain. Light pours in, a little rude, a little holy. You step forward, aware of every careful inch you now carry. The corridor air tastes faintly of camphor and possibilities. You glide or try to, discovering the robe's secret. If you walk too fast, you look like a drifting kite. If you walk too slow, you look like an abandoned one. The trick is the middle wind. Joke 3, reward for endurance. Somewhere outside these walls, a farmer washes his face with plain water, ties his hair with a strip of cloth and calls it a day. You envy him for half a heartbeat and then remember your tea is better. The morning greeting awaits, and with it, the next layer of performance. You float toward it, powdered, pinned, perfumed, and perfectly balanced between effort and ease, carrying a small flower on your brow and a whole architecture on your head, ready to spend the rest of the day pretending none of this was hard. You arrive at the etiquette hall like a swan that's read too many manuals about swanning. The room is spare on purpose, no tapestries to hide behind, no helpful shadows. Just polished floor, a row of reed mats, and 3 supervising matrons whose expressions suggest that joy is acceptable only if it has been approved in triplicate. Your hair architecture hums at the base of your skull. Your willow brows pretend not to care. The drills begin with bows. There are varieties, of course. Quick greeting bows, grateful bows, sorrow bows, I'm sorry but also correct bows, and the dangerous deep one that risks your headdress becoming a tragic headline. You sink into the first like a dancer lowering into a memory, keeping the back straight, the eyes soft, the fan held just so to guard the mouth without seeming secretive. Mainstream historical fact slides across the mat. Court ritual codifies power. In many dynasties, the exact depth and duration of a bow tracked rank the way a measuring stick tracks growth. One finger's breadth too low and you're presumptuous, one moment too brief and you're insolent. Your matron taps the floor with a bamboo pointer. Again, you rise, breathe, sink. The belt centimeters that negotiated a truce with your stomach earlier now test the integrity of that treaty. All around, silk whispers. The hall becomes a chorus of quiet obedience. The pointer clicks once more, approving a fraction, objecting to an angle. You file away each correction like you filed away the maid's murmured perfect, knowing both mean try harder. Then the eyes, oh the eyes, down when dismissed, up when welcomed, never wide unless thunder strikes, recites the second matron, whose own gaze could thread a needle at 10 paces. You practice the sliding glance that acknowledges someone's presence without claiming their attention, the brief lift that thanks a compliment without trapping it, the half smile that says, I enjoy this conversation, while your brain is counting how many pins are holding your encircling lotus in defiance of gravity. A quirky tidbit drifts through the air like incense. Some ladies trained with tiny polished metal dots hidden on the opposite wall. The goal was to glance toward the dot without actually focusing on it. An art of looking without landing, like a moth that respects curtains. Fan language comes next. You have one today, ribbed and silked, the scent sachet you mended still making the slightest clove note when you open it. The matron demonstrates. A slow open says calm. A quick half open says, a thought you're not sure you should share? A closed fan held near the heart says sincerity, or, depending on the dynasty, I am not part of this conversation but would like to be. You practice the figure 8 drift, an idle pattern that keeps the wrist loose and the elbow meek. Joke 1. You realize this is essentially cardio for the shy. Posture drills resume, your shoulders remembering where they live, your neck writing a formal complaint to the union of vertebrae. You walk the reed mats heel to toe, the long sleeves trained to breathe on their own, not erupt into a theatrical flare at the first draft. Your jade pendant tinks a calming metronome. The trick, the matron insists, is to look like a scroll being unrolled. No snags, no hurry, the story appearing as if it always existed. Gesture set 3, calls the first matron. You rotate through polite refusals, accepting tea you will barely sip, declining fruit you desperately want, agreeing to favors you'll outsource to your better organized friend. Each gesture carries rank-coded angles. Higher-ranked ladies allow more space between fan and cheek. Lower-ranked keep things compact, as if tidiness were a virtue that could be measured in square inches. Historians still argue whether commoners who entered court service learned these codes from scratch or adapted village etiquette upward. Manuals suggest a sharp learning curve, while gossip suggests everyone faked it until a matron wrapped their knuckles into accuracy. Knuckles do get wrapped. The third matron moves like a cat with opinions, tapping wrists that arc too bravely, elbows that flare like banners, fingers that forget they're supposed to be clouds. You absorb the corrections, grateful your long nail guards are decorative today, not talons that could snag dignity on the way down. Somewhere in the back row, a new girl stifles a sneeze. Powder goes everywhere. You inhale a memory of rice fields, and the room pauses just long enough to decide whether to laugh. It does not. Discipline wins on points. Tea break, which is really a lesson in how to look like you are not on break. You kneel, ankles folded so neatly you could store them on a shelf and accept a cup. Steam moves up like a curtain. You practice the sip that hides the mouth and the sip that shows you're listening. The tea is barely more than a scent against the porcelain, but the warmth settles nerves that the pointer couldn't chase away. Joke 2 floats by. Somewhere in the city, a street hawker slurps noodles with the enthusiastic sound of thunder. Here, you swallow like a secret. Conversation exercises hover at the edge of the break like a host who won't go home. You exchange compliments that must sound sincere but cost nothing. On embroidery, you cannot see beneath someone's outer robe. On a hair ornament you privately suspect weighs more than a small bird. On a poem you have not been allowed to read. The matrons listen for traps, compliments that imply comparison, thanks that imply debt. laughter that implies alignment in a rivalry. You steer through with the fans, figure eight, eyes calm, voice soft, jokes sharpened to the gentlest edge. The most useful skill is paradox, to be interesting without being memorable, to be graceful without being striking, to be present without being suspected. The bell sounds, low, round, a reminder that parts of the palace move on different clocks. Now court choreography, entrances, exits, the sacred geometry of where to stand so that your shadow does not trespass on someone else's significance. Maps notch into your spine, when to angle 2 degrees toward the inner gate, when to step 4 reed mat widths from the closest lantern so your silk doesn't flare in its draft. Mainstream fact returns. Palace audiences ran on choreography as strict as any ritual sacrifice. Who stood where and moved when carried meaning that officials would parse later with the care of scholars reading omens and tea leaves. You practice the receive a message approach because news travels here like wind through bamboo, bent, musical, and sometimes full of splinters. A junior attendant plays courier, kneeling with a tablet. You step forward precisely 3 paces, fan closed, eyes lowered to the angle that says gratitude without greed. The matron nods almost imperceptibly. Victory tastes like room temperature tea. Then the harder drills. Neutral face while being corrected in public. Neutral face while rivals are praised. Neutral face while your hairpin shifts a millimeter and you contemplate the shortness of life. You master the palace smile, tender at the corners, unreadable at the center. The supervisors approve. Their job is to turn your face into a lake, where stones thrown leave only polite rings. A whispered module on veils and screens, how to stand behind one and still be part of a conversation, how to lean just enough to catch sound without becoming a silhouette story for the corridor. A quirky tidbit lightens the reed mats. Some screens were painted with landscapes deliberately busy in the area that would hide a listener's profile. If you moved, mountains moved with you, and the gossip flowed on, blissfully unalarmed. The final circuit is steps on the courtyard stones, outdoor etiquette where wind, sun, and the occasional opinionated sparrow complicate perfection. Your sleeves learn to lift a finger's width to avoid dust. Your eyes learn to find shade lines for standing that flatter the robe's drape. Your fan learns to be both shield and semaphore. The jade pendant keeps time. Joke 3, the sparrow lands on a railing, judges your exit turn, and awards you an invisible score for most likely to ignore a breeze with dignity. By the time the bell returns, softer now, your body has absorbed a small library. Where to pour your weight when you kneel, when to blink during a reprimand, how to end a bow without looking relieved. Never look relieved. The matrons release you with nods that feel like stamps in a passport, permission to proceed to the rest of your day, carrying a cargo of manners that weigh nothing and everything. You leave the hall as you entered, unhurried, measured, a painting that knows it might be asked to move again. Somewhere, a corridor draft tests your hair architecture. It holds. The powder still softens the world. The Huadian is still a raindrop thought. You tilt your fan once, a tiny figure 8 of thanks to the quiet, and let your feet find the next reed mat life will unroll. You shuffle back along the corridor, shoulders aching from posture drills, hairpins still plotting mutiny. The air smells faintly of millet porridge and ink, which means breakfast has at last graduated from theoretical to edible. A maid gestures toward the smaller dining hall. Concubines of your rank rarely eat in the grand one unless the emperor plans to make an entrance, and today he does not. The room greets you with low tables, lacquered red, set with small bowls steaming as though to prove the kitchen has accomplished something beyond gossip. You kneel into place. The cushions are thin on purpose. Good posture shouldn't require comfort, apparently. Around you, silk rustles as the others settle. It's a quiet choreography, sleeves folded, fans closed, smiles balanced. Then the food, steamed buns, delicate and pale, pickled vegetables cut so neatly they look ashamed of knives, rice porridge that sighs with a single dried date. You take up the porcelain spoon, careful not to clink against the bowl's rim. The sound of clinking in the hall is as shocking as a sneeze in a library. Mainstream fact to float on your porridge. In many dynasties, concubines were fed according to rank, with both quantity and garnish scaling like bureaucratic salaries. A top consort might get duck and sauce, while you are grateful for a bun that doesn't collapse under its own steam. Still, it is warm, and in the palace, warmth counts as luxury. Conversation is a gentle breeze here. The women around you lean slightly, eyes lowered, voices like moth wings. A word about the weather, safe. A sigh about the previous night's dreams, safe unless the dream featured someone recognizable. A compliment on embroidery, even safer provided it's vague enough not to sound like an audit. You practice your murmured, "Oh, really?" and "how interesting" responses, which serve as diplomatic bandages to cover any conversational stumbles. Across the hall, two younger concubines share a suppressed giggle, the kind that sounds like secrets learning to walk. One glances at you, then looks away too fast. Joke one, apparently even in a gilded cage, clicks form, and you're not sure if you're the sparrow on the railing or the crumb in its beak. Breakfast includes tea, barely bitter, with a scent of chrysanthemum and faint smoke. You lift the cup with both hands, bowing your wrists slightly, and sip as though it's philosophy. Historians still argue whether the strict etiquette of meals was meant to encourage tranquility or simply to keep 100 women from staging a rice-fueled rebellion. You decide both explanations are plausible, though your stomach votes for rebellion at least twice a week. Now the alliances begin. You notice a higher-ranked concubine offering a half smile toward another, then deliberately dropping a pickled vegetable into her bowl. It looks like generosity, but it's also a test. Refuse and you risk offense. Accept too eagerly and you seem needy. The recipient accepts with graceful delay, fan flicking once like a bird, stretching a wing. Everyone notes the exchange. Your own bowl remains politely unaugmented, which is safer. Neutrality tastes bland, but it is filling. Midway through, a servant announces the arrival of pastries. Small, flaky, filled with red bean paste, they appear like diplomacy disguised as dessert. One is set before you, a crisp shell shining faintly with egg glaze. You break it apart, and steam curls like a promise. A quirky tidbit arrives with the crumbs. In some reigns, pastries were shaped into flowers whose petals corresponded to the number of concubines then favored. To eat one was to bite into gossip. Today's pastries are circles, mercifully noncommittal. The hall fills with the sound of restrained chewing, which is less a sound and more a choreography of not making sound. It's oddly soothing, the rhythm of many mouths agreeing that food matters more than politics, if only for 3 bites. You notice a servant's hand tremble slightly as she pours tea. She's new, probably terrified of spilling. You want to tell her that 1 drop of tea is survivable, but palace life has taught you advice travels slower than punishment. You simply catch her eye and nod. The tremble stops. Small victories. Unrecorded. Conversation shifts to dreams of festivals, lanterns, kites, embroidered shoes. Someone mentions an opera troupe preparing for the new year. You smile, though you know you'll likely watch it from behind a carved screen, seeing actors' shadows more clearly than their faces. But the thought of music, costumes, painted masks, it's enough to lace the porridge with faint sweetness. Joke 2. You wonder aloud, softly, whether the pastries will ever evolve into something so sweet and sticky they glue a rival's fan shut. A woman beside you hides her laugh in a cough, and you pretend to admire the pattern on the teapot. The meal winds down. Bowls are gathered, fans reopen, conversations taper. The senior consort in the corner rises first, and everyone follows like a row of reeds in wind. You fold your fan, bow slightly, and glide back toward the corridor. Your stomach is both full and unfulfilled, the paradox of palace food. Enough to survive, never enough to forget where you are. Historians still argue whether the concubines truly enjoyed these breakfasts or endured them as ritual. Diaries are scarce, but a few scribbled notes suggest both. Meals as the highlight of monotony, meals as the stage for rivalries more delicate than porcelain. You leave the hall with that taste in your mouth. Porridge, tea, pastry, and the faint flavor of politics. The corridor greets you again with this long stretch of polished floor. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows late, as though palace time confuses even the birds. You carry your fan, your smile, your carefully neutral alliances, and the thought that today has only just begun. Joke 3. If you make it to bedtime without embroidering your frustrations into a pillowcase, it will count as success. And success, like porridge, is best when quietly consumed. The corridor curves into a quieter wing where windows open onto a walled garden. Beyond the lattice screens, the day is still young. The air carries that damp promise of dew, even though you know the stones are already warming beneath the sun. You are escorted to the embroidery chamber, which sounds innocent enough. Thread, fabric, patient fingers. But here it doubles as both classroom and stage. This is where hours vanish into stitches and where gossip is embroidered as finely as silk peonies. You kneel at a low frame, the taut silk stretched like a pale lake. Threads of crimson, gold, and jade spill from little porcelain jars, each one labeled with careful calligraphy. A matron demonstrates the stitches, chain, stem, satin, all of them demanding more precision than balancing a hairpin in a windstorm. You thread the needle, squint, and remind yourself that one crooked line could look like rebellion, while a neat chrysanthemum might secure a compliment that echoes beyond the chamber. Mainstream fact settles in your lap with a thread. Court embroidery wasn't merely decoration. It functioned as proof of virtue, patience, and cultivated skill. Consorts were expected to supply garments for festivals, and in some dynasties even gifts for visiting dignitaries. What you embroider today might someday travel further than you ever will. The room hums with the sound of needles kissing silk. It is not quite silence, but the rustle has rhythm, like crickets performing under curfew. Beside you, two concubines lean a little closer than necessary. Their voices are low, words tucked between stitches. One mentions a new fragrance arriving from the south. Another wonders aloud whether the emperor prefers plum blossoms to lotuses this year. Every phrase is a thread, safe on its own but capable of weaving into a larger picture. You add your own tiny comment, something about the quality of the silk, neutral enough to be overlooked, but enough to join the tapestry of conversation. Joke 1. You wonder if anyone has ever stitched their complaints directly into a sleeve lining, only to have a servant discover the embroidered phrase, "I'm bored," during laundry. The matron strolls between frames, peering at progress. She nods when she sees your stitches straight and even, then pauses when a neighbor's thread puckers the fabric. No scolding, just a small frown that promises the next lesson will be longer for her. You keep your gaze lowered, grateful your hand hasn't betrayed you yet. Historians still argue whether palace embroidery circles were true training sessions or more like orchestrated performances. Diaries hint that many women already knew how to stitch long before entering the palace, but the ritual of stitching together served as a reminder of discipline and perhaps a chance to measure one another's patience. You suspect both are true. The morning light shifts, warming your shoulders. Servants circulate with tea poured quietly into bowls so small they seem designed to keep you thirsty. You sip and return to the chrysanthemum petal taking shape under your needle. The repetition soothes. It's easy to imagine hours slipping away unnoticed, a day dissolving into thread. Yet your ears never stop listening. Each cough, each laugh, each whispered comment could alter tomorrow's seating at breakfast. A quirky tidbit drifts into the room with the steam. Some concubines stitch tiny charms or hidden words into the hems of their robes. A single red thread tucked into a seam might carry a prayer, a hope, or even a message no one else would notice. You glance at your frame and wonder if you should risk a single thread of your own, something harmless, like a small character for peace hidden in the petal's curve. The thought makes you smile, but you keep your hands steady. Around you, alliances play out in fabric. One woman leans over to compliment another's stitches, voice dripping with honey that masks a sting. "Your peonies are so bold they could frighten bees." Another woman sighs in mock humility, saying her hands are clumsy, though her fabric shows perfect cranes flying across a dawn. You nod politely, add a quiet, "so graceful," and return to your chrysanthemum. Neutrality is your favorite color of thread. The matron finally dismisses you for a short rest. Needles are set aside, frames covered with cloth to keep dust away. You stretch your fingers, stiff from work, and feel the faint pulse of pins at your scalp remind you that your hair is still intact. Joke 2, you imagine the embroidery session as a battlefield where the weapons are needles and victories are measured in petals. Stepping outside into the garden, you breathe deeper for the first time today. The walls are high, but within them plum trees bloom, their fragrance gentler than powder. A pond mirrors the sky, broken by the ripple of carp. A pair of concubines stroll along the path, voices just low enough that you can't hear words, but high enough to remind you you're never really alone. You join the path at a safe distance, fan opening lightly in your hand. Historians still argue whether gardens like this were intended for relaxation or surveillance. Their carefully placed pavilions and curved paths offered beauty, yes, but also vantage points for attendants or higher-ranked women to observe. You feel both truths, the calm of flowers, the awareness of eyes. You pause near a plum tree, touch the rough bark, and think of the chrysanthemum waiting unfinished at your frame. Your stitches will outlast your walk. Your petals will bloom long after your feet have tired. You smile softly, sip the last of your tea, and turn back toward the chamber, where silk, thread, and whispers await. Joke 3 tucked under your breath. Perhaps one day historians will study your embroidery and declare she had excellent stitches, but questionable patience. You suspect they'd be right. The embroidery frames are covered again, and you're herded down another corridor where the air smells faintly of resin and old strings. The music chamber waits. If embroidery measured patience, this is where skill is staged for listening ears you may never see. Rows of guqin and pipa rest on lacquered stands, their strings catching stray sunlight. The cushions are arranged so that no one can claim center, though everyone tries anyway with their posture. You kneel before a guqin. Its wood is polished smooth, dark as midnight tea. The matron presiding today has fingers like iron reeds. She can pluck a string and make the air itself apologize. You flex your hands, aware that embroidery has left them stiff. The first exercise is tuning, which is less about perfect pitch and more about showing you can listen. Mainstream fact, the guqin was long considered the instrument of scholars and refined ladies. Its 7 strings symbolic, its tones meant to echo harmony between heaven, earth, and humankind. In the palace, though, harmony often meant play something pleasant enough to keep tempers down. You pluck carefully, the note shivers, then fades. You adjust the bridge a hair's breadth because in this hall, hairs carry consequence. Across the room, a girl's string snaps with a sound like a reprimand in midair. Everyone flinches. The matron sighs. The girl's cheeks flush, and she lowers her gaze so sharply you wonder if she might never lift it again. The first song, Flowing Water, ironically cruel since you'd rather be drinking it. Fingers press, slide, lift. The notes drift soft as dawn. Your fan rests at your side, useless here. You focus on the strings, remembering the hours drilled into you, plucking patterns that echo like footsteps across a courtyard. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you play. Some court ladies would deliberately tune their instruments a half step lower, so when they played in groups, their sound blended more gently, like a stream beneath the river of others. Too perfect was dangerous. Harmony, even in mediocrity, kept you safe. You toy with the thought, pluck a note softer, and let it vanish before anyone can tell if it was intention or error. After guqin comes the pipa. Its pear-shaped body sits heavy against your lap, frets biting lightly under your fingers. The matron demands scales, fast, relentless, no room for dreamers. Your hands stumble once. You disguise it as ornamentation. Joke 1, palace life has taught you to turn mistakes into experimental art with a straight face. The room fills with overlapping melodies, a garden of strings blooming all at once. Notes flutter, hover, collide. You steal a glance at your neighbor. Her fingers dart so quickly you suspect she was born holding a plectrum. Her eyes flick toward you, expression unreadable. Rivalry exists, even in sound. Historians still argue whether concubines were expected to master instruments to attract imperial attention or simply to provide refined entertainment for one another. Manuals suggest the former, letters hint at the latter. You play with both thoughts, your notes a whisper to the emperor's absent ear, but also a comfort to yourself in the sealed chamber. Midway through, the matron calls for duets. You pair with a girl whose robe is embroidered with bamboo leaves, steady and upright. She begins, you follow, weaving your notes between hers. The melody is an old folk tune about fishermen and riverbanks. You've never seen a fisherman, but your fingers pretend. The two of you trade phrases, her strength balancing your caution until the matron nods. The nod feels like spring rain after a long drought. The session stretches, your back stiffens, your fingers ache. Tea arrives, ginger infused this time, sharp enough to wake a dozing listener. You sip, grateful, though your lips brush the rim with powder still intact, leaving a faint print like an accidental seal. You imagine a servant finding it later and declaring, evidence she drank tea at 10 a.m. Joke 2, you hope no historian ever studies your tea stains for clues. The final exercise is improvisation. Each concubine must pluck a phrase that paints an image. A few conjure flowers, rivers, cranes. When it's your turn, you let your fingers slide slow, deliberate. The sound is low, steady, almost like footsteps echoing down a long corridor. You glance at the matron. She nods once, murmurs patience. It feels like both critique and compliment. As the session closes, instruments are covered, hands rubbed with camellia oil to ease the strain. You flex your fingers, grateful to be free of the strings for now. Outside, the garden hums with cicadas, loud and indifferent to court perfection. Historians still argue whether these music sessions were daily obligations or occasional tests. You know what's true today? Your back hurts, your fingers are sore, and your head is full of melodies that will haunt your nap. Joke 3 drifts as you leave the hall. You imagine the emperor wandering by, hearing the tangled chorus and mistaking it for a very confused flock of geese. Perhaps you think even geese would envy the discipline. The corridor welcomes you again, this time with faint echoes of laughter from elsewhere. Another duty waits, another set of skills to pretend you enjoy. The day is long, and music is only one verse in the palace's endless song. Your fingers still hum from the Guccian strings as you follow the drifting sound of brushes scratching against paper. The poetry hall is less a hall and more a chamber disguised as a study, with windows cracked just enough to let in air perfumed by garden pines. Low tables are scattered like islands in a sea of mats, each one weighed down with inkstones, brushes, and scrolls eager to be filled. Here, the palace expects concubines to display not only beauty, but the kind of cultivated wit that can be tied up neatly in 7 characters per line. You sit, legs folded, and reach for the brush. Its handle is smooth bamboo, its tip a fine spear of wolf hair, both friend and menace. Ink waits in the stone, a pool as black as midnight tea. You dip, lift, test the stroke. The first characters bleed slightly, your hand remembering, your patience sighing. You steady yourself with a breath, reminding your wrist that poetry is less about perfection and more about rhythm, though here the two are often mistaken for the same thing. Mainstream fact rests on the paper. Poetry was currency in court. To compose a clever couplet, to quote a classic at the right moment, to allude gracefully to a plum blossom or a drifting cloud, these could mean more than jewels. Some emperors tested consorts with verses weighing talent like a scale measures silver, fail, and your silence echoes louder than any rhyme. You trace a line, bamboo sways though roots are still, so must the heart bend. Not your best, but good enough for morning. The woman beside you writes quickly, brush dancing. She tilts her page just enough for you to glimpse cranes painted with such detail you expect them to stretch wings. She catches you looking, smiles faintly. Rivalry comes in many shades, and hers today is pale ink and a lifted brow. The matron overseeing poetry coughs, a sound more terrifying than thunder. She wanders between tables, glancing, nodding, frowning. When she pauses behind you, you keep your breath shallow. She reads your line, hums, and moves on without comment. Relief is a small bird fluttering in your chest. A quirky tidbit sneaks into the air with the scent of ink. Some concubines, bored of regulated verses, would write riddles or acrostics into their poems, hiding jokes or names among the characters. A fan unfolded at the right angle could reveal a message only one person was meant to see. You resist the temptation to tuck a tiny jest into your line today. I am sleepy. Spelled down the column might not be appreciated. The room begins to whisper. Small exchanges pass under the cover of composition. What rhyme fits with plum blossom? How do you soften longing without sounding desperate? You join, offering a suggestion about moonlight that earns a nod. Alliances can be stitched in thread or ink. Both require steady hands. Tea arrives in tiny cups, the steam curls carrying jasmine. You sip, careful not to smudge your sleeve with ink. Joke one drifts from your lips. You murmur that if poems could buy freedom, you'd have written yourself a road by now. A woman 2 tables away stifles laughter with her fan. Historians still argue whether these poetry sessions were genuine exercises of creativity or elaborate displays meant solely to impress. Surviving anthologies include verses from consorts, some profound, some plainly composed as duty. You suspect the truth is both, moments of inspiration hidden between lines written because someone demanded ink. You lean back, flexing your cramped fingers. Outside, a sparrow hops along the sill, peeking in as though curious about your rhymes. You jot another couplet, lighter this time. Sparrow at the window frame laughs at our long sighs. It's simple, but it makes you smile. The matron calls for recitations. Each concubine reads her verse aloud. voice pitched low and clear. Some stumble, some shine. When it's your turn, you read your bamboo line, let the syllables linger like soft footprints across the floor. The matron nods once. Approval, however faint, tastes sweeter than the tea. As the session winds down, scrolls are rolled, brushes rinsed, inkstones wiped clean. The scent of pine resin lingers, sharp against the faint sweetness of jasmine. You rise, feeling the weight of words added to the weight of silk and etiquette already balancing on your shoulders. Joke 2 sneaks into your thoughts as you leave. If historians ever discover these practiced scrolls centuries later, they'll assume you all lived entirely on clouds, cranes, and plum blossoms. No mention of aching backs or itchy robes. Perhaps history is just carefully curated boredom. The corridor outside seems brighter, as though poetry itself has polished the air. You walk slowly, fan-folded, scroll tucked away. Another task complete, another hour filled. The palace has endless ways to occupy time, each more delicate than the last. Historians still argue whether the concubines found joy in these arts or endured them like drills. Your smile is small, your sigh softer. Maybe both. Perhaps joy is not in the writing, but in the brief moment when the ink dries and you feel you've captured something that will outlast the morning. Joke 3. You wonder what the sparrow would compose if given a brush. Probably something short, sharp, and vastly more honest. You envy it for a heartbeat, then step on, back into the palace's carefully inked rhythm. The corridors narrow, the smell of ink replaced by sandalwood smoke curling in lazy ribbons. You know what comes next, the lecture chamber, where scrolls stack like mountains and patience is the only path through. Low desks line the room, each furnished with bamboo slips and heavy-bound books. The air feels still, as if even the dust motes are listening for wisdom. You take your place cross-legged on a mat, the desk cool against your forearms. The master enters, his robe simple, but his eyebrows sharp enough to cut paper. He carries a volume of the Analects, holding it like a weapon disguised as philosophy. His gaze sweeps the room, pausing just long enough to remind you that drifting thoughts will not survive here. He begins in a steady voice. The gentleman understands what is moral. The small man understands what is profitable. Mainstream fact. Confucian teachings were considered essential training for court women, not so they could rule, but so they could embody virtue, obedience, and refinement. It's ironic, you think, since no one asks if gentlemen in power truly follow these words themselves. You copy characters onto bamboo slips, the brush dragging slowly, the ink dries too fast in the still air. You sneak a glance at your neighbor's work. Her strokes are confident, her wrist steady. She notices your gaze, smiles slightly, then smudges one character deliberately as if to say, see, even perfection can wobble. You appreciate her generosity. The master pauses, asks for recitation. One concubine stammers through a line about filial piety, her voice small. Another delivers hers with such practiced ease you suspect she rehearsed all night. When it's your turn, you steady your breath, let the words roll gently. Joke 1 flickers in your mind. If these lessons are meant to lull you into virtue, they might also double as the world's oldest sleeping aid. A quirky tidbit floats in your thoughts. Some palace women were rumored to hide romantic poems or secret notes between the pages of their study texts, so a Confucian lecture could suddenly reveal verses about longing glances and clandestine meetings. You wonder if anyone in this room is hiding a page like that, tucked neatly where the master will never peek. Hours stretch. The master drones about righteousness, loyalty, order. Your eyelids grow heavy. You pinch your sleeve lightly, willing yourself awake. Historians still argue whether such lectures were truly daily practice or simply ceremonial, meant to display the emperor's investment in a cultured harem. Either way, your mind wades through molasses, each sentence like a stone dropped into a pond with ripples that never quite reach you. A servant delivers tea, unsweetened, sharp with green bitterness. It shocks you awake just enough to hear the master's anecdote about a scholar who refused bribes of gold because knowledge was treasure enough. Joke 2 whispers. Had the scholar lived here, he might have traded an entire philosophy for a single afternoon nap. The lesson continues with questions. The master asks, what is the duty of a daughter? A girl recites the expected answer, obedience, gentleness, respect. He nods, satisfied. The room feels heavy with the weight of rules none of you wrote, but must memorize as though etched into bone. Finally, dismissal comes with the clack of a bamboo pointer on the desk. You bow, roll your slips, and return them to the shelf. Your legs ache from stillness, your mind from repetition. Yet there's a strange comfort in the monotony, like weaving threads into a tapestry so uniform you forget who began it. As you rise, you catch sight of a tiny doodle scratched faintly into a desk corner. A crude fish, its mouth open wide. A secret rebellion from some long-ago student now smoothed by time. Joke 3, you think maybe the fish was also begging for release from a Confucian lecture. The corridor outside greets you with moving air, fresher than anything inside the study hall. You exhale, shoulders easing, brush still faintly ink-stained. The palace has taught you that knowledge is less about enlightenment and more about endurance. Yet, somewhere between the lines, a truth lingers. Even here, within walls that cage, the mind finds ways to wander. The air is cooler here, though the courtyard beyond glitters under the noon sun. Shadows press themselves close to the walls, and you follow them into a chamber where faint bells tinkle in the breeze. This is the meditation hall. Its floors are swept so clean you feel guilty letting your sandals touch them. Incense coils dangle from the beams, burning slowly, smoke twisting upward like secret writing. You settle onto a mat, the straw pressing evenly against your knees. Around you, rows of concubines bow their heads, hands folded, breaths measured, as though the entire room is trying to exhale in unison. A monk in pale robes sits at the front, eyes half-lidded, voice soft. He begins with a chant, not loud, not commanding, but steady like water dripping from a stone. Mainstream fact whispers here. Buddhism spread deeply into Chinese courts, where emperors built monasteries and consorts often practiced meditation as part of their daily cultivation. The practice was thought to bring calm, virtue, and maybe even heavenly merit that reflected well on the dynasty itself. For you, right now, it feels more like a battle between calm and the rumble of your stomach. The monk asks you to picture a lotus. You try. In your mind's eye, petals unfold in pale pink, dew sparkling like pearls. You breathe in. The incense clings to your throat, sweet and heavy. You cough once, quietly. A matron's head flicks toward you like a hawk. You bow lower, pretending reverence instead of airway rebellion. Joke 1. Apparently, enlightenment requires excellent lung capacity. A quirky tidbit slides into the quiet. Some concubines supposedly used meditation less for spiritual awakening and more as sanctioned napping. Eyes closed, breaths slow, posture upright. No one can prove you weren't contemplating the void while sneaking a dream. You fight the temptation now, eyelids drooping with treacherous weight. The monk's voice continues, let go of craving, let go of anger. You think about craving dumplings, craving freedom, craving a breeze stronger than this tiny stir. Anger, though, you have to admit, palace politics give plenty to release. You breathe deeper, counting slowly, willing your shoulders to sink. Historians still argue whether these meditation practices were genuinely transformative or just another form of performance, a ritualized calmness to impress visiting officials. In truth, it doesn't matter much as long as you're sitting here, back stiff, knees aching, pretending serenity. Your thoughts drift, always dangerous. You imagine the emperor sneaking into a session, sitting cross-legged among you, trying not to sneeze from the incense. Would anyone correct his posture? Joke 2, probably not, though you suspect the monk might dare if his patience snapped. The chanting slows, fades, and silence presses in. You hear your own pulse louder than anything else. A bird outside shrieks, impatient with human stillness. The monk instructs you to focus on emptiness. You focus on your stomach again, which gurgles rudely into the hush. A few heads tilt, you pretend it was the mat creaking. Time stretches oddly in meditation like honey dripping. At last, a bell rings. A single, sharp note. Everyone exhales together, shoulders rising and falling like a single body. Relief feels almost holy. You unfold your legs, pins and needles stabbing cruelly. Enlightenment apparently comes with numb feet. A servant passes cups of warm barley water. You sip. Earthy and plain, but grounding after incense clouds. You bow toward the monk, who nods faintly as if he has seen through every wandering thought you failed to hide. You smile politely, grateful he doesn't say them aloud. Joke 3 follows you out the door. You think maybe nirvana is simply the moment your knees stop hurting after sitting too long. If so, you're halfway to sainthood. The corridor beyond is brighter, livelier, the drone of meditation replaced with chatter from servants moving trays of food. Your body perks up. Afternoon is arriving, and with it, another layer of palace routine, this one perhaps more immediately satisfying than lotus flowers or empty minds. The scent hits you before the sight: ginger, sesame oil, something fried until golden. Your stomach leaps like a happy carp. Noon means food, and for once the palace feels merciful. You follow the swirl of smells into the dining chamber, a long hall cooled by woven screens and bustling with servants balancing trays. Each low table gleams with lacquer, polished enough to see your reflection looking faintly impatient. Dishes arrive in procession: steaming bowls of rice, glistening platters of fish, vegetables glazed until they shine like jewels. A pot of fragrant soup simmers gently, its broth clouded with tofu and greens. Mainstream fact serves itself here. Palace kitchens employed entire armies of cooks, preparing elaborate meals not just for the emperor but for his household, including the concubines. Recipes were carefully guarded, and sometimes a single dish was considered proof of a dynasty's refinement. You eye the food and think refinement smells suspiciously like garlic. You sit, knees folded, hands demurely in your lap until the signal is given. Then you lift chopsticks, the wood smooth, the tips clacking softly against porcelain. The first bite, rice plain but steaming, warms your chest like kindness. You close your eyes, savor. Around you, others do the same, though etiquette demands silence. It feels like a very quiet feast, where joy must hide under lowered lashes. A quirky tidbit drifts across the table. In some courts, concubines weren't allowed to eat garlic or onions at all, lest their breath offend the emperor. You snort softly into your soup. Joke 1. Apparently, eternal beauty stops at the mouth. Garlic ban or not, you resolve never to trust a man who doesn't appreciate dumplings. The servants replace dishes as quickly as they empty: pork braised until tender, lotus root sliced like lace, delicate pastries filled with bean paste. You sample each carefully, reminding yourself that overindulgence is frowned upon. Still, the pastry flakes melt on your tongue, and you wonder if resisting pleasure is really a virtue. The woman beside you eats slowly, her chopsticks poised with elegance. She catches your glance, smiles faintly. A silent exchange passes between you. Yes, the pastry is worth risking the matron's scolding. You both take another bite. Historians still argue whether concubines dined daily on such luxuries, or if these feasts were reserved for special occasions with plainer meals on ordinary days. Today feels ceremonial, though perhaps every day is ceremonial when you live inside a performance. You sip tea oolong, floral, its steam curling against your nose. The warmth calms your stomach but makes you drowsy again. Joke 2 slides into your thoughts. Maybe the emperor secretly sponsors these heavy lunches so everyone naps instead of plotting. A brilliant strategy, if true. After the main courses, bowls of fruit appear, persimmons sliced into crescent moons, grapes glistening like little globes of jade. You pick one, pop it into your mouth, and marvel at the sweetness. For a moment, palace life feels indulgent rather than stifling. But etiquette interrupts. You must dab your lips, fold your napkin neatly, and place chopsticks just so. Everything is measured, even satisfaction. You obey, though inside you sigh, wishing once to eat with abandon, sleeves rolled up, juice running down your chin. A servant clears away the last plates. The hall settles into quiet contentment, punctuated by soft coughs and the faint clink of cups. You lean back slightly, careful not to slouch. Outside, cicadas buzz, their steady hum a reminder that the world keeps turning beyond these walls. Joke 3 arrives with dessert, a chilled jelly made from lotus seeds. You taste it, refreshing but bland, and mutter under your breath that it's the palace equivalent of eating flavored air. The woman beside you hides a smile behind her sleeve. At last, the signal comes. You bow your head, rise, and file out with the others. Hunger satisfied, mind softened, you step into the corridor where shadows lengthen and the day's rhythm shifts again. Afternoon waits with new tasks, new masks, and maybe, if you're lucky, a moment to digest both food and fate. The courtyard hums with the after-lunch lull, a slow rhythm of sandals shuffling, servants tidying, and cicadas buzzing like an orchestra too lazy to stop. You follow the stream of concubines toward a shaded pavilion, its red pillars glinting softly in the sun. A stack of lacquered boxes awaits there, carved with dragons and clouds. Inside, distraction, the sanctioned kind. When the lids are lifted, games spill forth like promises. Go boards with their black and white stones, dice carved from bone, smooth with age, painted cards with flowers, birds, and coins. Laughter hums low, carefully muffled, as women kneel around the tables and begin. Mainstream fact here, board games like Go and Lubo were staples of Chinese courts, not just entertainment, but sometimes subtle training in strategy, patience, and social etiquette. You set a stone on the board and try to look clever, though mostly you're thinking about whether winning or losing earns fewer enemies. Your opponent smiles sweetly, eyes flicking over the grid as though she can already see 10 moves ahead. You sip tea to hide your nerves. Joke one surfaces, you realize these games aren't about black and white stones at all. They're about how elegantly you can lose without looking like a fool. Nearby, two women rattle dice in a bamboo cup, letting them clatter across the mat. The sound feels oddly thrilling, like rebellion disguised as leisure. One whispers a wager, perhaps an embroidered scarf, perhaps simply who fetches the next pot of tea. You grin at the ordinariness of it, though even here, nothing is without consequence. A quirky tidbit flickers in your memory. Some concubines reportedly trained parrots to call out winning numbers at dice, a little feathered cheating scandal that amused the palace until the bird started blurting secrets it shouldn't. You glance around, no parrots here, only sharp eyes and sharper minds. The game stretches, stones click against wood like rain on a roof. You realize you've been cornered quietly, each of your territories shrinking while your opponent smiles serenely. You could fight, but instead you lean back, let the defeat fall gently. She nods, victorious but gracious. Joke 2, you whisper that you let her win, though your board says otherwise. Other tables murmur with rising cheer. One concubine slaps her winning card down with a bit too much satisfaction, and her friend scolds her playfully. For a moment, the air feels almost ordinary, like a group of neighbors idling on a quiet street. Almost, except for the gilded screens, the embroidered robes, and the hovering maids pretending not to eavesdrop. Historians still argue whether these game sessions were casual escapes or veiled arenas of politics. Every smile, every sigh, every piece moved a performance in itself. Watching your peers now, you suspect it was always both. The sun shifts, light filtering through the lattice work and painting tiny squares across the mats. A servant refills cups, careful not to spill. Someone yawns behind her sleeve. Another stifles a giggle when a die rolls under a table, pursued by crawling hands. You play again, this time with someone younger, her fingers trembling slightly as she places a stone. You guide her with soft words, letting her win without saying so. Her relief glows brighter than victory. Joke 3 curls in your mind. Perhaps teaching someone else to win is the palace's most dangerous game of all. At last, the pavilion quiets, games packed back into their boxes, laughter fading into whispers. The cicadas outside sing louder, filling the silence with their steady drone. You rise, knees stiff, and glance toward the next courtyard. Beyond, you glimpse cages of bamboo and flashes of feathers. Another pastime waiting, one filled with chirps, claws, and creatures more spoiled than some humans you know. The afternoon stretches onward, full of strange companionship. The next courtyard is all flutter and fuss, a menagerie scaled to palace size, meaning every creature has better housing than most people, and none of them pay rent. Bamboo cages hang from eaves like lanterns that discovered chirping. A row of shallow ponds glints with goldfish, their fins ruffling like silk sleeves in a polite breeze. On the steps, a sleepy cat elongates itself into a philosophy of comfort, while two tiny dogs patrol as if their legs were longer than your patience. You step beneath the shade and the sound gathers around you, trills, warbles, little metallic twitters, the delicate tinkle of water moving over stone. A eunuch, face serene, opens a cage and coaxes a thrush onto his finger. The bird tilts its head and, for a ridiculous heartbeat, seems to bow. He offers it a sesame seed with the gravity of a court appointment. Mainstream fact perches helpfully. Songbirds, thrushes, canaries, when they came later, the beloved hume with its painted eyes, were prized in elite Chinese households, trained to sing specific patterns and carried in ornate cages for leisurely walks. Men and women alike competed in the quiet sport of whose bird could turn mourning into music first. You are handed a cage of your own, a round bamboo marvel with a carved ivory feed cup and a swing that looks smug about its elegance. Inside, your bird, small, brown, unassuming until it opens its beak, hops once and begins a phrase so clear it makes the air blush. You hold still, arm extended, wrist steady. The song threads through you, and for a moment the palace dissolves into the simple geometry of notes. Near the fish basins, a pair of concubines sprinkle crumbs and watch gold tails flicker like pennants. The bowls are not merely bowls. Some have curved glass panels that magnify the fish to exaggerated importance. A quirky tidbit floats to the surface. Certain households fitted small viewing lenses into the sides of goldfish basins, so the fish looked grander and more dramatic, turning an ordinary swim into a theatrical performance. You lean closer. A pale orange comet glides by, momentarily imperial. Then the dogs arrive like gossip with legs. Two Pekingese, though you, living before anyone has named them for a foreign audience, simply call them palace lions. Their coats are clouds with opinions. One trots straight to your hem, sniffs with bureaucratic thoroughness, and sits on your foot as if to affix a seal of ownership. You freeze. Your embroidery matron would call this an opportunity to practice composure. You call it a hostage situation. Joke 1. There are fewer ways to move with grace when your shoe has been nationalized by a dog the size of a dumpling. A maid brings a lacquered tray with tiny brushes and combs, more tools than you got for your own hair this morning. She demonstrates how to part the dog's mane, dusting a whisper of rice powder through the fur to keep tangles from seceding into separate provinces. Another maid gently ties a silk ribbon near the ear, just enough color to suggest taste, not enough to suggest vanity. The dog tolerates the procedure with the dignity of a retired official. Cats, meanwhile, do not tolerate procedures, they conduct them. One rises from its philosophical coil, stretches until its spine counts to 12, then pads to your knee and assesses you. Its bell, blue silk cord, little bronze chime, tinks like distant etiquette. Historians still argue whether palace cats were officially kept as mousers or unofficially adored as companions. Some records list them as vermin control, while paintings give them cushions nicer than your pillow. This one, by the feel of its fur and the look in its eyes, belongs to the adored department. You stroke behind its ears. The purr starts low and certain, a sound like a Guchin that found enlightenment. You think briefly of the meditation hall. Perhaps the monk should keep a cat. Whole sections of the palace would achieve nirvana in under a minute. The cat needs your robe carefully, as if massaging gratitude into the fabric. Your jade pendant tinks. It blinks at the sound and decisively sits in your lap. Congratulations. You are furniture. Across the courtyard, a bird fancier practices bird walking. Not the bird, but the human. He holds the cage in his left hand, arm bent, elbow quiet, stepping with measured confidence so the tiny singer keeps singing. You attempt a few paces with your own cage. The trick is to move as if nothing around you deserves worry. Not the robe threatening to trip your ankle, not the ribbon the dog has just filched from someone's sleeve, not the cat now whispering mine into your lap with its whole body. Joke 2. You have never been more aware of your center of gravity than when balancing 80 grams of opinionated feathers. A maid suggests you feed your bird a sliver of pear. The beak clicks gently against the fruit, and the eyes, two black seeds, regard you without judgment. You feel unexpectedly seen. No dossiers, no rank, just a creature that appreciates a good snack and a steady hand. You whisper a nonsense compliment and pretend it answered. Mainstream fact, now with pause. The small lion dogs associated with the palace likely came from ancient breeding of flat-faced toy dogs favored by nobles. They lived pampered lives behind the vermilion walls, were sometimes given as diplomatic gifts, and had attendants with job descriptions that would make a modern resume weep. The dogs at your feet demonstrate one such duty being adored by rolling over with the dramatic sigh of actors who know their lines. A junior concubine arrives, arms full of cricket gourds, the woven kind with little air holes and a plug like a secret. She sits nearby and sets them beside her like a row of tiny lutes. The gourds tremble with microscopic thunder. She smiles. For nighttime, she whispers, when sleep misbehaves. You nod, making a note. Lullabies come in many sizes. The matron pretends not to notice. Everyone pretends many things here. Between bird trills and fish swishes and bell tinks, the courtyard settles into a pleasant hum. Life curated. You trade a ribbon with another woman, hers a better shade of river green, and offer her a pinch of millet for her finch. She thanks you as if you've passed a poem, not grain. Alliances stitched earlier in thread and ink now tie softly via seeds and string. Your cat, entirely finished with your lap, stands, rotates once, and collapses on your sleeve. Precisely the sleeve you were asked to keep immaculate for the afternoon calligraphy review. You examine the faint imprint of fur, the glamorous new accessory you did not request. Joke 3. Historians will later debate whether the faint hairs on that scroll indicate a new school of feline-assisted calligraphy. The sun leans, shadows stretching like cats themselves. A eunuch claps gently, a signal that rest hour is closing. Birds tuck beaks, dogs collect pats like taxes. Cats grant or deny departures with the caprice of minor deities. You coax your lapsed landlord back to its cushion. It leaves a single paw on you for 1 extra second, an IOU of affection, then leaps down without thanks. You return your bird to its hook, making sure the water cup is full and the seed cup topped. The tiny singer pecks once, then fluffs into a punctuation mark. You resist naming it aloud. Names in the palace become gossip too quickly. In your head, however, it is morning thread. It feels right, something that stitches the day together. Historians still argue whether pet keeping among concubines was encouraged to cultivate gentleness or tolerated as a harmless outlet for women otherwise constrained. The records are polite, the paintings are poetic. The truth probably purrs somewhere in the middle, shedding responsibly. You step out of the menagerie shade, sleeve discreetly dusted, heart lighter than it was an hour ago. The palace can be cage within cage, but here, for a sliver of afternoon, you borrowed simpler loyalties. Song for seed, purr for scratch, ribbon for patience. The cicadas pick up the tune outside the gate, a rough chorus under the fine one you're leaving behind. Your jade pendant tinks in time. The dog on your foot barks once as if to say, remember me. You will. Beyond the curved roofline, clouds drift like slow caravans. Somewhere a bell will call you to the next duty, tonics probably, or whispered recipes that promise longer hair and longer favor. You breathe, set your pace, and let the courtyard fade behind you, carrying a pocket full of birdsong you cannot prove and a single invisible cat hair you absolutely can. The next chamber smells faintly of roots and boiling leaves, an aroma that straddles the line between healing tonic and your grandmother's experimental soup. You step inside and find low tables covered in ceramic jars, paper packets tied with twine, and bundles of dried herbs that look like they've been plucked from 1,000 different hillsides. The concubines gather in loose circles, heads bent as if sharing secrets, but in truth, they are trading recipes for resilience. Mainstream fact floats to the surface. Chinese palace life relied heavily on traditional medicine. Imperial physicians were always nearby, but concubines themselves learned the basics: how to brew calming teas, concoct skin-brightening lotions, and prepare the occasional tonic that promised longevity. You watch as a senior concubine ladles a pale green liquid into tiny porcelain cups. Its steam carries the bite of ginger, the sweetness of licorice root, and something bitter that makes you suspicious. She hands you one with a serene smile. Good for the blood, she murmurs. You sip cautiously. It tastes like grass. Had a serious conversation with sugar and forgot to invite flavor. Joke one surfaces. If health is measured by how unpleasant something tastes, you are now immortal. On another table, a maid grinds dried chrysanthemum flowers with a mortar and pestle, the petals turning into golden dust. She sprinkles it into warm water, and the infusion glows like liquid sun. A concubine leans close, whispering that chrysanthemum tea cools the body, perfect for summer's suffocating heat. You nod, making a mental note. Next time the sun feels like a punishment, you'll beg for this particular drink. Quirky tidbit slips in. Some concubines reportedly believe powdered pearls mixed with honey could preserve youth and bring luminous skin. You watch as a tiny jar is opened, its contents shimmering faintly in the lamplight. A girl dabs her fingertip into the powder, blending it with a drop of rose water before smoothing it across her cheek. It leaves no visible trace, just the idea that she's become a little closer to moonlight. You resist asking how many oysters suffered for this experiment. Around the circle, women compare remedies with the same seriousness others reserve for statecraft. One insists hawthorn berries settle digestion after too much rice. Another swears by mulberry leaves to calm anxious thoughts. A third swears louder, which makes you wonder if she's actually cured of anything at all. Historians still argue whether palace women genuinely studied medicine for self-care or simply borrowed authority from household physicians, but watching these exchanges, you see real belief simmering between cups. At a side bench, a concubine carefully trims slivers from a block of musk, a substance so valuable it's nearly mythical. She mixes the fragments with crushed cloves and dried orange peel, forming little packets tied with red string. These sachets, she explains, are tucked under pillows to clear the breath and, if you're lucky, sweeten dreams. You tuck this idea away, secretly hoping it works better than last night's counting of bells. Joke 2 nudges its way in. Someone proposes garlic as a cure-all, and you silently thank the heavens emperors don't judge intimacy by breath alone. The room hums with small experiments. A girl tests ointment on the back of her hand, wrinkling her nose at its pungency. Another measures dried goji berries into her sleeve pouch with the precision of a tax collector. One maid hovers, tasked with refilling kettles and ensuring no concoction tips dangerously into poison. You wonder how many times her job has saved the empire from accidents disguised as wellness. A concubine seated across from you leans forward, voice soft, confessional. Do you know the one with deer antler shavings? She describes how it's boiled into a tonic said to fortify the spirit. You nod politely while thinking deer antlers should probably remain on deer. Joke 3. If drinking ground up bones makes you strong, your soup pot is secretly a gym. The discussion drifts from remedies to omens. One concubine insists her tea must be stirred clockwise or it loses potency. Another claims if the first sip burns the tongue, it means an enemy is nearby. The group chuckles, but no one dismisses her entirely. In a place where so much depends on unseen forces, favor, fortune, rumor, superstition feels like an extra ingredient in every cup. A eunuch arrives with a ledger, noting which herbs have been consumed, which need replenishing, which shipments are due from distant provinces. His brush scratches softly across the page. It reminds you that behind every packet of dried root is a caravan, a chain of hands carrying fragile leaves across deserts and mountains. You imagine traders shrugging, wondering why palace women pay so dearly for bark that tastes like bitterness. The hour slips by, marked by the rising and falling of steam. You find yourself calmer, even if the tea left a stubborn aftertaste of damp forest floor. The act of sitting, sipping, sharing small confidences, it soothes. Even the arguments about which remedy works best sound like affection in disguise. Historians still argue whether these circles were truly about health or whether they served as another form of alliance building where swapping recipes meant swapping loyalty. Perhaps both are true. Certainly you leave with the sense that health here is not just physical but social, who trusts you enough to share the good tonic, who warns you against the suspicious one, who remembers your preference for ginger over licorice. The jars are sealed, the ashes from the brazier swept into tidy piles. Concubines stand, stretch, adjust their robes. The smell of herbs lingers, earthy and heady. As you step back into the corridor, a servant hands you a small packet wrapped in silk, your own take-home remedy, apparently. You thank her and tuck it away, uncertain if it's a cure for fatigue or just another way of saying you're part of this circle now. The corridor air feels fresher, the faint herbal perfume following you like a ghost. Ahead, steam curls from another wing of the palace, carrying scents far more indulgent than bitter tea. It smells of roses, sandalwood, and something creamy. A bathing chamber waits, promising warmth, luxury, and maybe, just maybe, a break from being sensible. Steam greets you like a polite ghost, curling from the doorway and licking at your powdered cheeks with warm, damp fingers. The bath attendants bow you in, their steps silent on stone polished by 1,000 careful feet. The chamber opens wider than you expect, vaulted ceiling crossed by cedar beams, lanterns veiled in gauze, walls painted with pale cranes flying so slowly they might be thinking about landing. Water murmurs from a lion's mouth spout into a sunken pool, each drop a tiny promise that heat can be kinder than the noon sun. You pause at the threshold because pausing is half the pleasure. Behind you, corridors of rules, ribs of hairpins, a fan with its figure 8 of restraint. Before you, a room that asks only that you breathe. The attendants move as if choreographed by mist. One kneels to unfasten your belt with reverence. Another lifts the robe so its hem never kisses the damp floor. Mercy for the embroidery and for your pride. You step out of silk as though emerging from a story, slower at first, then with a quiet relief you feel in your shoulders, down your spine, into feet that have argued with sandals all day. Mainstream fact arrives with the steam. Palace bathhouses were not mere tubs, but carefully engineered spaces, heated floors, channels to carry away used water, tiers of pools at different temperatures. Women of rank bathed with attendants to manage hair, oils, and modesty. The attendants test the water with their wrists, nod, and guide you down the worn steps. Heat reaches up through the surface, welcoming and absolute. You sink to your shoulders and listen as your hair architecture, that proud pavilion, accepts negotiation. It softens but holds, pinned high and wrapped in a fine oiled cloth to keep the loops from unscrolling into idiotic heroism. The first breath in the pool tastes faintly of minerals and petals. Someone has scattered dried osmanthus blooms on the surface. The little yellow stars ride the ripples, brushing your collarbones like polite confetti. You close your eyes and hear the chamber more clearly. The lion spouts trickle, the clink of a brass ladle, a sigh from 3 paces to your left that sounds like a lifetime resigning from its post. Relief, like perfume, spreads. A tray arrives by the poolside, small jars of rice bran polish, a cake of soap scented with sandalwood, a shallow dish of salt mixed with orange peel. The attendant asks softly which you prefer first, as if you're composing a poem of texture. You choose the rice bran, it's gentle, a grainy cloud in her palm. She smooths it over your forearms in slow circles, and the powder of the morning surrenders without a duel. Your skin takes a breath you didn't know it was holding. Joke one rises, lazy as steam. You murmur that you're shedding enough to embroider a new you, and the attendant's mouth flickers in a no, not quite smile that still counts. On a side bench, a brazier keeps water hot for rinsing. The attendant dips a ladle and pours in narrow streams that find the hollows at your shoulders. Heat layers over heat until even worry loosens. The Huadian on your brow, your tiny raindrop flower, has softened at the edges, but it clings like a loyal rumor. You imagine it floating off and taking a tour of the pool. It doesn't. Duty, even floral, knows where it belongs. Quirky tidbit surfaces between ripples. Some bathhouses kept small floating mirrors, polished bronze discs that drifted on a wedge of wood. Women used them to check their hair or to admire how steam softened every edge of a face into myth. An attendant sets one floating toward you now. You tilt it and see yourself as a painting would wish you were. Brows willow soft, cheeks dewy, eyes less besieged by rules. The mirror wobbles, the painting laughs, and a droplet kisses the tip of your nose as if to say, there you are. Across the chamber, a quiet conversation unspools, 2 women comparing oils. Almond for softness, camellia for shine, sesame warmed for joints turned sulky by winter. Historians still argue whether favorite oils were chosen for health, fashion, or superstition, since recipe manuals read like love letters and ledgers read like negotiations. You choose camellia because your hair has earned a good temper. An attendant warms a little in her palms until the scent lifts. Green, clean abode to tea fields you'll never visit. They unroll the hair wrap carefully, and the edifice sways but does not collapse. Pins glitter like tiny moonlets loyal to their orbits. The attendant dips a comb, peachwood again, that kind friend, into the oil and starts from the ends, coaxing each strand like a stubborn thought. She works upward, patient, then winds the whole waterfall back into its architecture, reinforced with silk ties that match your celadon robe. Your scalp hums thank you notes. On the step, a shallow basin holds crushed mint and a handful of polished stones. The attendants invite your feet into it, and the coolness shocks you pleasantly. Stones press into arches that have balanced etiquette all morning. You consider that perhaps the empire is held together less by decrees than by women who know where to place weight on the 3rd step and how to ride heat until it relents. You lean back against a smooth rock ledge warmed from within. Heat soaks into shoulder blades that have carried invisible wings of composure all day. The lion spout resumes its monologue. You let it speak for everyone who needs an alibi for silence. Joke 2 drifts up. You tell the attendant that if virtue were measured in minutes spent in hot water, you would be a saint. She bows her head to hide a grin and says the water's happy to assist your canonization. A small cup appears, ginger tea sweetened with a touch of jujube. You sip and warmth folds over warmth. The cup's rim is thin as a promise and just as fragile. Steam paints your lashes. You blink into velvet. For a long moment, the palace and you agree to let each other rest. Around the rim of the pool, light from the gauzed lanterns trembles on water, sketching gold calligraphy on the ceiling. You read none of it, but feel smarter anyway. The attendants offer a silk cloth roughened slightly with woven nubs. They slide it along your shoulders and arms, coaxing the day to exit via the pores. When they lift the cloth, it smells faintly of sandalwood and victory. From a shelf, they bring a tiny porcelain jar of paste the color of pears, face mask, they murmur, of ground mung bean and a whisper of honey, cool against heat. They spread it thinly over your cheeks and forehead, avoiding the brave Huadian which receives a respectful mote. You sit still as stone softens, listening to the chamber's chorus of drips and breaths. If a bell rang now, you might not rise. The world is adequately rung already. You think of the cat hair still stowed somewhere in your sleeve and decide it counts as a souvenir. You think of embroidery petals, Guccian scales, the sparrow who judged your poem. All of it loosens in the pool, not forgotten, but less sharp. The palace cannot follow you into water without losing a little height. When the mask has cooled to thought, the attendants rinse it away with water perfumed by a pinch of crushed rose. You smell like a rumor of gardens. Another pours a thread of oil across your shoulders, then presses with the flats of her thumbs along muscles that have been pretending not to be muscles. They yield one by one like officials receiving a just decree. Your nails get attention next. Guards removed, tips shaped with a sliver of ivory. The attendant buffs them with a tiny silk square until they shine like discreet arguments. She slips the guards back on, and you feel ceremonial again, but in a kinder key. Joke 3, you think, not for the first time, that your long nail guards are proof of civilized life, mainly because you can't do anything uncivilized while wearing them. At last you rise, water pouring from you in fine strings. A shawl of thin cotton, pre-warmed, ridiculous, heavenly, wraps you while another cloth catches drips before they grief your hem. The floor's warmth surprises your souls. You step into drying alcove air that smells of cedar boxes and clean beginnings. The robe arrives, fresh, a twin of the morning's but slightly lighter, like a secret only you and the day share. Sleeves embrace you with practiced familiarity. The belt ties obediently, the tassel finds its note, your jade pendant tinks a tiny amen. They check your hair temple one last time. All pins accounted for, the encircling lotus re-sanctified, the Huadian, refitted with a new petal, blinks awake. Before you leave, the attendant offers a final choice from a tray of perfumes, plum for resolve, orchid for gentleness, agarwood for a quiet that carries. You pick plum because resolve sounds like the right story to wear. A single dab at the pulse, no clouds, only echo. You bow to the room, to the lion spout, to the steam still writing slow letters overhead. Outside the corridor, air feels different against skin the water taught to listen. You walk softer without meaning to. Somewhere far off, a bell turns the afternoon's page. Duties wait, whispers in corridors, the sum of what baths cannot rinse. Favors, silences, a summons that might come with the moon. For now, though, warmth travels with you like a small, invisible cloak. You breathe. The day resumes, and you are newly equipped to pretend you were always this serene. The bath's warmth lingers like a polite secret under your skin when you step back into the corridors. Here the air changes. It thins, grows curious, as if the palace itself leans in to listen. Pillars cast long stripes across the polished floor. Between those stripes, news travels, soft as breath, fast as rumor. You adjust your fresh robe, feel the jade pendant's reassuring tink, and remind your face to be a lake again, calm at the surface, busy underneath. You sense it before you hear it, the small traffic of glances, the choreography of servants passing each other with nothing in their hands and everything in their sleeves. A maid carrying an empty tray moves slower than necessary. A eunuch pauses to study a crack in the plaster that doesn't exist. Two junior concubines compare sleeve embroidery with the intensity of generals studying maps. You slide into the current, fan closed, gate unhurried, and let whispers brush your ears like moth wings. Mainstream fact threads itself through the hush. In imperial palaces, information moved on the backs of servants, eunuchs with access to doors that never opened for anyone else, maids who dressed hair and heard sighs, stewards who handled ledgers and noticed who received peaches in winter. Hierarchy was written in silk, but news was written in footsteps. You mark the footnotes now. The kitchen wing is livelier than usual, the music court quieter, the perfumer's garden heavy with agarwood as if preparing for evening. At a corner, you pause to admire a vase decoratively, which is to say publicly, while a laundress fusses with a basket beside you. She never looks up, yet you hear the thread she drops. New bolts from Suzhou, she breathes, colors reserved. Reserved for whom? The vase suddenly becomes fascinating. Not you. Your rank doesn't court reserved dye. Someone higher. You hum, the sound of a tiny boat that floats you across the moment without docking either side. You move on, a swallow pacing the eaves. Another cluster, two older maids discussing nothing in particular, rice quality. who sneezed during morning greetings, whether the lotus pond wants dredging, except the sneezing belonged to someone important, and dredging is code for renovating a certain pavilion. Joke 1. You privately rename the entire palace metaphor city, where no one says what they mean and everyone means it twice. Historians still argue whether concubines orchestrated rumors or merely survived them, because the records favor edicts over whispers. Diaries suggest both roles were common. Some women turned gossip into armor, others wore it like a bruise. You prefer silk. Armor chafes, bruises fade, silk goes with everything. At the turning of the long gallery, a eunuch with a face like a folded fan stands as if waiting for his own shadow to arrive. He adjusts a tassel 3 times, signal, not now, sets his ring finger against the pillar, signal, later, and blinks once more than nature requires, possible signal or an itch. In palaces, even blinking becomes suspicious. You acknowledge him with a breath, not a nod. If the corridor has ears, it also has eyes. Yours behave. A flutter down the side hall pulls you, scraps of paper drying on a line near the calligraphy room. Poems, yes, but also excuses. Ink practice, paper test. Don't read. Someone has written a very fine character for Plum on a scrap whose torn edge looks purposeful. A maid collects 3 of the papers and drops one, then drops the wrong one a second later, which is to say the right one. You step with useless grace and pin the paper with your fan's tip. Careful, you murmur, passing it back. She whispers, West Lantern at dusk. The fan closes, the moment passes, you are now in possession of nothing at all, including a small appointment with possibility. Quirky tidbit arrives like a giggle in the rafters. Fans were sometimes painted with codes only certain friends could read. Tiny asymmetries in bamboo ribs, marking letters, knots in the tassel counting days on a lunar calendar, even just where perfume was dabbed, meaning yes or tell me later. You glance at your own fan. It smells of plum, resolve, not rendezvous, but you consider its unpainted ribs as a future alphabet. You take the long way to nowhere, which is how you get everywhere in a palace. The shadow corridor lives up to its name. Lantern light pools on the floor like soft coins you are not allowed to spend. From an adjacent pantry comes the delicate music of porcelain touching porcelain, which somehow always means a conversation pauses mid-sentence. You pause too, examining a non-existent thread on your sleeve, while the quiet resumes breathing. When you move again, you carry 2 extra syllables you didn't have before. Imperial hunt. Early autumn. A change of schedule, a relocation of attention. Hunts rearrange 1,000 small lives like ghost-stones on a board. Kitchens prepare different meats. Stables wake earlier, seamstresses unearth writing sleeves. You file it under useful later. Joke 2 taps your shoulder. If someone whispered, the emperor sneezed, the palace would draft a sneeze schedule, designate sneeze attendants, and embroider handkerchiefs with the character for Gesundheit. You do not smile outwardly. Your fan would tell on you. Near the garden gate, you find a junior concubine studying koi as if they might spell prophecies with their tails. She greets you with the legally mandated sweetness of your relative ranks, then innocently mentions that the imperial wardrobe requested measurements for performers. Performers? For whom, for when, for what occasion, with what lanterns and which drums? She does not know, which is to say she knows but requires acknowledgement of her knowing. You give her a single compliment on her hairpin's angle. Just enough thanks. Balance is an instrument you tune hourly. 2 maids argue in whispers about a broken hairpin, glass, not jade, gift, not favor, accident, not omen. The word omen makes the corridor's temperature drop. Omen talk is dangerous spice, a little makes soup interesting, too much scalds tongues. You keep walking. A messenger boy, so small his cap looks like ambition, darts past with a sealed bamboo tube. He is intercepted by a taller eunuch whose smile says my job, whose hand says mine, whose turn says hurry later. The boy surrenders the tube with a heroic lack of sighing. You admire him and slightly pity the message that must now survive 2 owners in a corridor. You angle toward the west veranda, the one with the cracked floor tile that everyone pretends not to notice and therefore uses as a landmark. At the 7th pillar, your laundress friend reappears with a damp bundle. She tilts her basket so you can see a sleeve you recognize, river green ribbon you traded in the menagerie, now a little darker, where the cat put its signature. Will lift, she says, meaning the stain, meaning perhaps something else. A mood, a day, a fortune. You thank her with exactly the gratitude allotted to laundry and miracles. Around the bend, a rumor sharpens. The emperor tasted a new lychee from the southern orchards and asked for more. Lychees do not travel alone. They bring with them porters, permissions, and attention that trickles downhill like sweet syrup. The concubine who arranged the taste will glide brighter for several days. Her friends will appear glossier by association. Her enemies will discuss indigestion. You imagine the fruit, cool, perfumed, a pale sweetness that disappears too quickly, and feel a tiny sympathy for anyone adored for a week and forgotten by the next harvest. West, lantern, at dusk, the maid had breathed. You check the sky through the carved screen lattice. The light is beginning to soften, turning gold, like tea left to think too long. Enough time remains for one detour and two accidents. You choose neither and head for the western cloister, which smells of paper and rose thorns. Near the lantern stand, you pretend to admire the carpentry. The maid appears, clothes unobtrusive, eyes not. She hands you a folded scrap as if passing you a moth. You do not take it. She lowers it to the step and fusses with her sash until you have time to step away and then back, by which time the moth has landed under your fan. You slide it into your sleeve because sleeves are what stories use as pockets. Later, when the corridor returns to being just a corridor, you'll read it, for now you collect your face again. Historians still argue whether concubines ever meaningfully influenced policy through rumor currents or whether the palace's feminine channels were merely domestic weather maps, predicting breezes, not storms. In the cracks between arguments, you suspect both have been true, depending on the century, the emperor, the courage, the luck. You, today, are a barometer that keeps its readings to itself. Joke 3, you fantasize about opening a tidy little booth labeled rumor accounting, where people could deposit half-truths like coins and receive exact change in facts. You would be wealthy or unemployed, or both by lunchtime. As the hour thins, the corridor grows briefly honest. Servants hurry, shadows lengthen into sofas your thoughts could nap on. A bell far away marks the turn toward evening. You become again what the palace prefers to see. A polished painting that moves without squeaking. In your sleeve, paper warms against your skin like a soft heartbeat. In your mouth, silence tastes like a fruit you almost recognize. You walk on, not faster, not slower, rehearsing the single performance that matters here, appearing to know nothing while learning everything. Evening spreads across the palace like ink dropped in water, curling into every corridor, softening every edge. Lanterns flicker awake, painted silk shades casting tangerine halos onto red lacquer beams. The air feels cooler, touched with the perfume of sandalwood and faint jasmine drifting from hidden gardens. You walk slowly, as if the dusk has wrapped itself around your ankles, leading you toward the quarters where the concubines prepare for a ritual as old as dynasties, making themselves into living art. In the outer hall, brushes stand upright in jars, delicate stalks tipped with sable hair. Small porcelain palettes are dotted with color like tiny dawns waiting to be spread. Rouge powdered so fine it floats if you breathe too hard. Coal sticks lined like soldiers, jade-handled combs that gleam even in weak light. Servants move with careful choreography like priests at an altar. You step into this sanctuary of self-painting, aware that beauty here is neither private nor optional. It is a duty, a ledger, a battlefield. Mainstream fact brushes itself across your mind. In Imperial China, cosmetics were often made from ground minerals, plant extracts, and even powdered pearls reserved for those of higher rank. Pale faces were favored, a symbol of refinement and distance from labor. The contrast between blood-red lips and powdered skin became the vocabulary of elegance. Tonight, you join that silent conversation. A maid approaches, carrying a tray that looks more like a painter's kit than a vanity set. She tips a tiny bowl, mixing white lead paste until it gleams like wet porcelain. With a soft brush, she smooths it over your forehead, cheeks, chin. The sensation is cool, as if erasing your day's heat. Joke 1 tiptoes in. You wonder if this paste is less about beauty and more about turning every concubine into matching porcelain dolls for the emperor's cabinet. Across the hall, another concubine leans forward, her reflection in the bronze mirror curiously distorted. Broad where she is narrow, oval where she is heart-shaped. She dabs vermilion onto her lips with the precision of calligraphy, each stroke tiny, deliberate, rehearsed. Her maid whispers encouragement, though you suspect the real audience is herself. A thin laugh escapes someone nearby when a smear goes too wide, quickly hushed into silence. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some concubines would paint delicate flowers or even tiny birds at the corners of their lips or eyes, fleeting decorations that lasted only the evening but hinted at personal wit. You imagine stepping into the emperor's gaze with a plum blossom painted at the corner of your mouth and wonder whether he would see it as charm or audacity. The attendants move onto your eyes, stroking dark kohl along the lids, extending them into elegant wings. Your reflection changes, soft gaze sharpened into suggestion, lashes lengthened with soot and resin paste. You study yourself, half stranger, half familiar, and think how much of a face belongs to the one who wears it, and how much belongs to those who stare at it. Joke 2. You briefly consider painting an extra eye on your forehead just to see if anyone would dare comment. Perfume follows, light dabs at the wrists, behind the ears, in the folds of silk near your collar. Sandalwood, musk, faint lotus oil. The scents mingle until you feel less like yourself and more like a walking incense burner. Yet, in this world, aroma is memory, a signature. Someone will remember the concubine who smelled of lotus, the same way they remember whispers or winning go stones. You inhale carefully, choosing to belong to lotus tonight. Historians still argue whether concubines painted themselves entirely by choice, or whether the layers of powder and paint were demanded by court standards enforced by attendants who served as both stylists and spies. Watching the line of women transform now, you suspect it was both, desire and duty braided together, indistinguishable by lantern light. The hairdressing begins, a ritual unto itself. Your maid parts your hair with a bone comb, smoothing it with sesame oil until it shines like lacquer. She coils it upward into loops, pins it with golden flowers that weigh more than you'd like. Her hands are quick, practiced, yet each movement feels ceremonial. You wonder if she has arranged more history with her comb than the emperor has with his decrees. Across the room, laughter threatens to bubble again as another concubine's towering bun leans sideways, too heavy for its own ambition. Maids rush to rescue it, propping it with extra pins until it regains dignity. Joke 3. You imagine the emperor being greeted by a hall of concubines who all slowly tilt to one side under the weight of their own hairstyles. When the room finally stills, you sit among dozens of women, each one a portrait framed in silk and light. Bronze mirrors catch fragments of faces, powdered cheeks, crimson lips, jewel-draped brows. For a moment, the air feels like a gallery, and you, one of the exhibits. Yet beneath the paint, you know the heartbeat is still yours, untamed. Lanterns are carried in, flames swaying. A bell chimes faintly, summoning. The emperor has chosen tonight for an evening stroll, perhaps even a glance into this curated garden of faces. A ripple of adjustment moves through the hall, straightened backs, lowered eyes, breaths measured as though inhaling too greedily might smudge the paint. You rise with the others, the scent of lotus still clinging, the pins in your hair tight as secrets. The night waits, the emperor waits, and somewhere outside the cicadas continue their steady hum, indifferent to who wears paint, who is seen, who is forgotten. The night air folds around you like a shawl as you and the others step into the lantern-lit garden. The pathways shimmer with soft light, the glow of oil lamps catching on wet stones where gardeners have sprinkled water to keep the dust down. The air tastes of late summer, warm, perfumed with night-blooming flowers, faintly damp as if the moon has been dipping its fingers in the fish pond. You walk with the practiced rhythm of someone who knows every step could be watched, yet who pretends no such thing exists. This is where entertainment begins, not with drums or dancers yet, but with the arrangement of people. Concubines line the veranda, jewels flickering in their hair like constellations, their painted lips curving into identical half-smiles. Eunuchs glide between them, carrying trays of tea or bowls of sliced melon chilled with ice chips rescued from the yakchols. The emperor has not yet appeared, but his absence is already a presence. Mainstream fact, in the Qing and Ming palaces, evenings often included banquets or informal strolls where favored consorts might catch the emperor's notice through conversation, poetry, or simply by being luminous enough in the lamplight. Yet even informal required choreography, every smile rehearsed, every glance measured. You slide into this choreography now, your fan resting loosely in your hand, a lotus scent rising every time you move it. On the far side of the pond, musicians set themselves with zithers and flutes. Their tuning sounds like dragonflies arguing. small notes skimming the surface before vanishing. One plucks a string too hard and earns a glare from the eunuch conductor. You pretend not to see. Joke 1. You imagine the emperor keeping a secret scorecard, -2 points for that flat note, +1 for the courtesan who didn't laugh at it. The entertainment begins with music, slow and deliberate, tones flowing like water from bamboo spouts. A pair of dancers follows, sleeves trailing like waves. They spin under the lantern glow, fabric breathing with every turn. The concubines applaud softly, not too loud, careful never to suggest that joy here is unregulated. You sip from a porcelain cup, the tea faintly sweetened with honey. A maid whispers that the honey is imported from the south, a rarity this season. You nod, filing the detail away. In a palace where everyone fights for favor, even bee paths matter. Quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some evenings, the emperor preferred shadow puppetry. Flat figures cut from hide, moved by rods behind a screen, their silhouettes telling epic tales. Imagine it, dozens of painted women sitting still as wax, while cardboard soldiers danced in the lamplight, and the emperor laughed harder at a puppet horse than at any real joke. Tonight, though, it is dance and music only, no shadows, except the ones everyone carries. Historians still argue whether these entertainments were meant primarily for the emperor's pleasure or as a theater where concubines auditioned subtly for his notice. Watching the careful way women laugh at the right time, lean just so, murmur the correct verse from memory, you suspect the answer is both. Entertainment is always doubled here, the show for the emperor and the show of the emperor's world for each other. The dancers bow low and exit, sleeves like sails folding into harbor. Eunuchs usher in the next act, storytellers. One clears his throat, dramatic, and begins a tale of a general who tamed horses with songs. His voice is deep, rhythmic, hypnotic. You lean back slightly, the story settling over you like a blanket, but half your attention drifts sideways to the way a rival concubine catches the emperor's half smile, to the way her maid discreetly adjusts the hem of her robe so that her foot shows just enough embroidered silk. Joke 2 passes in your mind. You think you should start handing out scorecards yourself. Best eyebrow lift during a joke. Most artful tea sip. Top performance in pretending not to notice another concubine, pretending not to notice you. At last, the emperor arrives. The shift is almost imperceptible. First the hush, then the bell, then the rustle of fabric as everyone lowers themselves like reeds bowing to the wind. He moves slowly, robes glimmering, face unreadable as an inkstone. You keep your gaze lowered, just enough to be respectful, just raised enough to let him notice if he wishes. The emperor pauses near the musicians, accepts tea, listens. Whether his eyes linger or not, you cannot tell. In palaces, even the act of looking is an empire. The entertainment resumes with acrobats flipping between torches, their shadows jittering across the palace walls. You smile faintly, letting the performance cover your own thoughts. The maid's scrap of paper still rests in your sleeve. Its weight is ghostlight but insistent. You wonder what secrets it carries. An invitation, a warning, or just another rumor dressed in ink. Another performer juggles lacquered balls, one slipping, bouncing too loudly on the tiles. The crowd exhales, but the emperor only waves a hand. Amused, relief ripples outward like concentric circles in the koi pond. You hide your smile behind your fan. Joke 3, you imagine what would happen if you accidentally sneezed right now. Half the palace would faint, the other half would draft a new etiquette book. Lanterns sway gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere behind you, cicadas buzz, their steady rhythm joining the music in a strangely soothing duet. You sip more tea, sweet and faintly cool, and let yourself drift into the story being told on stage. A general tames his horse with songs. A concubine tames her evening with silence. The emperor tames everything with his gaze even when he isn't looking. And you, painted, perfumed, composed, sit within it all, an ornament, an audience, an actor, a secret. By the time the moon climbs higher, the garden's music thins into threads, and the eunuchs begin their tidy whirlwind, collecting cups, dousing lamps, escorting performers past screens. You return to your quarters only long enough to trade the evening's lacquered mask for a lighter version, powder freshened, lotus lingering, hair inspected and repinned where a rebellious loop tried to become a legend. Then the bell you've been half expecting blossoms from the corridor. Festival orders. It seems the palace will spend the next weeks turning season into spectacle, and you, along with every pair of patient hands, are conscripted. The workroom yawns awake as if it never slept. Bolts of silk stand like soldiers at attention. Vermilion, moon white, river green, a blue so deep it could drown impatience. Tables bloom with paper patterns and chalk. Cinnabar cords, trays of sequins carved from mother of pearl. A steward reads allocations from a bamboo tally. Lantern crews to the west cloister, costume stitching to the central hall, dance rehearsals to the bronze-mirrored room. You are assigned to all three in a gratifying display of the palace's confidence in your ability to be in two places at once. Mainstream fact buttons itself neatly. Imperial calendars revolved around seasonal festivals. The Lantern Festival's Sea of Lights, Mid-Autumn's moon poems and pastry, double ninths, high climbs, and chrysanthemums. In grand courts, these became logistical epics. Thousands of lanterns, dozens of costumes, choreographies that mapped the emperor's benevolence onto bodies and silk. You set your fan aside, there will be no dignified fanning while chalk marks hemlines. Lanterns first. In the west cloister, carpenters and papermakers are already making the air smell like paste and hope. Bamboo ribs arch across sawhorses, fine as cage bird bones. Artisans stretch oiled paper over the frames until they take the shape of round gourds. Prancing rabbits, a dragon whose grin looks dangerously honest. Your handed brushes and a palette of mineral pigments. Clouds, the supervisor says, pointing to an unpainted dome. Auspicious ones, the kind that behave. You paint with care, curling spirals that will glow when the wick burns, tiny silver specks flicked like stars with a nail paring of mica. A junior concubine beside you paints peaches so plump you worry they'll roll off the lantern and into scandal. She giggles, then hushes, then adds a leaf and pretends it fixed the problem. Joke one, you suggest your clouds carry rain only for rival pavilions. She snorts into her sleeve and ruins exactly one star, which you rescue with a dot of blue. A quirky tidbit floats down the corridor. Someone claims the imperial storehouses keep a few sighing lanterns. When wind threads them just so, they hum like flutes. A eunuch insists it's nonsense, which means there are probably 2 such lanterns in a waiting list. You resolve to listen for them when the night is quiet and your feet are not. Costumes next. In the central hall, where seamstresses move like sparrows with needles, pattern paper rustles, scissors whisper. The festival's theme this year will unfurl as 8 gentle seasons, which is absurd because the weather rarely cooperates, but the palace enjoys arguing with nature. Your station, sleeve appliques for second spring, the late bloom that flatters the emperor's sense of timing. You couch silk cords into vines, tack on petals cut from gauze stiffened with rice paste, and stitch beads where dew ought to be. Your fingers remember embroidery hour. Your back remembers it too, noisily. A matron inspects the work with the concentration of a general facing maps. She approves your vines, adjusts someone else's chrysanthemum, then murmurs about the moon robes being a stitch too long. Somewhere, a runner sprints to warn the moon. Historians still argue whether the most elaborate outfits were truly worn by concubines or by professional dancers drafted to impersonate seasons, while the women watched from behind perfection. Records show both. Costly robes listed under entertainments, poems signed by women whose sleeves probably swayed in person. You suspect the palace prefers ambiguity. It lets credit travel further. In a corner, a tray of hair ornaments glitter like small, complicated thoughts. Kingfisher feather flowers, gilt butterflies poised to test gravity, pearls like tame meteorites. Your maid brings over a comb crowned with a crescent moon so thin it could shave pride. For mid-autumn, she whispers, as if the moon might overhear and become shy. You balance it on your head. Your neck inquires after hazard pay. Rehearsals, then in the bronze-mirrored room, where lantern light turns everyone into twin selves. The dance master claps thrice, the floor gathers attention. You learn steps mapped to a river's curve, 3 slow glides, a pause like a held breath, a sleeve that unfurls and refurls, as if reconsidering a confession. You mirror the woman to your left, who seems born with hinges made of music. The master corrects angles, softens elbows, scolds knees for thinking they are important. Your jade pendant tinks time. Your Hoytian stays, a small moon that refuses to fall. Lantern lift, he calls, and a line of paper moons floats into your hands. unlit for now, dusky and solemn, and you raise them in unison until the mirrored room looks like a reservoir of pale planets, all waiting for a spark. Joke 2, you imagine if one slipped free and rolled out into the corridor, the palace would promote it to Senior Secretary of Lost Objects. Between sequences, water arrives in cups thin as daytime gossip. You sip and study the choreography notes plastered to the wall. Curly-Q diagrams with characters for petal turn, dew step, gather sleeves. A seamstress scurries in with a bundle of emergency tassels. Tassels, you have learned, are emergencies waiting to happen. The master tries the new length, nods. Averted catastrophe. The Empire will not witness a tassel mutiny. Someone coughs the rumor that the Emperor himself might attend the second rehearsal, which causes 3 people to forget how elbows work. The dance master sighs and resets the phrase. Historians still argue whether imperial attendance improved performance or petrified it. You practice both possibilities, the version where your sleeve is a poem and the version where your sleeve is panic disguised as poetry. The night deepens. Lantern painters trade brushes for paste pots and glue cardinal tails to a phoenix you suspect is really a rooster with ambitions. Seamstresses yawn into fists and thread needles by feel. Dancers sweat silently, powder turning to a delicate paste that will gossip on collars later. You cycle between stations like a bee constitutionally incapable of choosing one flower. Near midnight, the steward calls a halt that feels like a miracle. Lanterns, dozens of them, rest on racks like moons in rehearsal. Costumes hang from rods, a forest of sleeves whispering in a silk dialect only they understand. Choreography notes flutter as a draft sneaks under a door and decides to be useful. You press your palm to the mirror. Your reflection presses back. Equally powdered, equally tired, equally almost convinced the sleeves are worth it. Joke 3 limps to your tongue. You whisper to your maid that if the festival theme is 8 gentle seasons, you'd like to submit nap as the 9th. She fails at not laughing, then covers the failure with a cough and an expression that suggests dust has offended her. On your way out, you pass a row of finished palace lanterns, one painted with cranes, one with pomegranates splitting to reveal many seeds, one with a rabbit pounding medicine in the moon. You pause at the rabbit. In some stories, medicine. In others, elixir of immortality. You consider asking for neither, settling instead for a good night's sleep and ankles that forgive choreography. The rabbit keeps pounding. You step back into a corridor where the lamplight thins to a thread and the cicadas drum a steady, indifferent approval of everything. Your sleeves smell faintly of paste and plum dye. Your hair holds one extra pin you don't remember earning. The festival will arrive whether you're ready or not. But for once, you feel the palace's busy heart beating in cheerful time with your own. Lanterns, costumes, steps. You've borrowed a piece of the season and stitched it to the inside of your day. Somewhere in the menagerie, your bird morning thread sleeps, head tucked, unaware that soon it will sing under a sky full of painted moons. In your sleeve, a scrap of rumor still waits, ink warmed by skin. Tomorrow will braid duty and chance again. Tonight, you let the corridor dark answer your steps with its soft, familiar echo and follow it toward a bed that will smell, thanks to sachets and stubborn hope, like a festival that already happened. Morning returns in a pale wash of gray, not so much sunrise as the palace lighting another candle behind thin silk. You stir before the bell, half because your body remembers the rhythm, half because your bird, morning thread, stirs and mutters a note like a violin deciding whether to wake. The maid enters with her usual tray, congee, pickled radish, tea steeped too long, and a strip of fresh silk for you to bite down on while enduring the endless combing. But today, whispers thread through the corridor before she arrives. Whispers not of festivals or rehearsals, but of shadows slipping across courtyards when no lamps were lit. By the time the eunuch steward begins morning checks, the rumors have blossomed into certainty. Someone tried to slip a note beyond the walls. Mainstream fact anchors you. Imperial palaces were fortresses of ritual but also of surveillance. Letters in and out were tightly controlled, and even a concubine's family might wait months for a single word filtered through layers of censors. Forbidden correspondence was considered not only a breach of etiquette, but a potential political weapon. The eunuch's voice echoes down the corridor. Every sleeve inspected, every cushion lifted. Your maid stiffens. Your hidden scrap of paper suddenly feels as heavy as the bronze bell itself. She whispers, "We can stitch it into a hymn. Quickly." Her needle flashes once, twice, and the rumor disappears into the fold of your morning robe. You try to breathe as if the extra weight is only imagination. The inspection party arrives like a winter draft, cool, searching, uninvited. They flip lids, shake jars, even tap walls to hear hollow lies. A junior concubine cries when her poetry is confiscated, written innocently enough but judged too heartfelt for safety. Joke 1. You think the censor should publish an anthology called Poems Too Dangerous for Breakfast. Sales would be brisk until someone banned it. When they reach your chamber, you lower your eyes and extend your sleeves for examination. The eunuch runs his hands over the seams, presses lightly at the hem. For a terrifying moment, his thumb hovers on the spot where your maid buried the rumor, but a cough from the corridor calls him away, and he mutters only, "Keep your poetry boring." You bow, relieved that your life is already a masterpiece of boredom. Quirky tidbit emerges afterwards. Someone claims a concubine once hid a note in a candied plum, then offered it to a visiting envoy. The envoy supposedly bit into it, nearly swallowed the message whole, and sputtered until a eunuch slapped his back. Whether true or not, the palace has since banned plums from official banquets. You eye the next dish of fruit suspiciously, half tempted to slice it open just to see if gossip leaks out. The corridor settles into uneasy quiet once the inspectors leave, but the whispers continue. Who sent the note? To whom? Some mutter it was only a love poem smuggled to a guard. Others say it was a coded report about court politics, a thread that could unravel robes from collar to hem. Historians still argue whether concubines truly wielded political influence through secret letters or whether most stories are embroidered exaggerations. Standing in your chamber with one rumor stitched into your robe, you suspect both are true, depending on the seamstress. The day plods forward with its duties, a calligraphy lesson, your brush trembling more than usual, drops of ink blooming like guilty blushes on the paper, a meal of lotus root soup tasteless because your thoughts crunch louder than radishes, afternoon embroidery, where you poke your finger and wonder if blood leaves messages even when uninvited. Your maid leans close as she threads another needle. Perhaps it's nothing, she says, as though saying so will make it so. You nod, though the idea of nothing feels like a luxury not sold in any palace market. Joke 2, you decide that if someone offered nothing at auction, it would go for 1,000 taels, provided it came wrapped in enough silk. Later, when lanterns are lit again, you walk in the garden, where the koi trace lazy letters across the pond. You imagine they are writing confessions that vanish as quickly as ripples. A fellow concubine joins you, her smile brittle, her words careful. Strange about the inspections today. You agree with the blandness of rice porridge. She tilts her head, the lantern light catching on the pearls in her hair. You mustn't worry. Secrets always find their way, whether we invite them or not. She walks on, leaving you uncertain whether she offered comfort, warning, or both. That night, in your chamber, your maid unpicks the seam. The scrap of paper slides free. You hesitate before unfolding it. The characters are small, hurried, smudged. Just a name and a place, unfamiliar to you. Not a love poem, not obvious treason, something in between, dangerous mostly because you cannot yet translate its weight. Joke 3 drifts through your tired head. You imagine delivering it back to the censor, shrugging and saying, "See, just a shopping list. We're out of nothing." You tuck it again beneath your pillow, half comforted, half cursed. The palace quiets around you, cicadas fading into crickets, lanterns dimming one by one. You lie awake thinking of candied plums with secrets inside, of koi writing invisible letters, of your hem still carrying the ghost of thread. When sleep finally comes, it feels like another inspection, swift, thorough, leaving you exposed. Afternoon thins into that pale, flavorless hour when the sun forgets to be dramatic and the palace forgets to be kind. You discover, as every concubine eventually does, that waiting is not the absence of work. It is the work. You sit in a side hall that smells faintly of dust and plum polish, hands folded, fan closed, face so composed you could rent it out as furniture. A maid pours water you don't drink. Another adjusts a curtain no one asked to move. Time pools like a lazy carp, blinking at you without apology. Mainstream fact threads itself through the stillness. Court life ran on measured intervals, drum watches ringing the five-night gang, clepsydras dripping in the time office, and incense clocks burning lines of powdered spice to mark the passing of hours. In the women's quarters, sticks of incense stood in shallow bowls, a domestic history of patience. One stick for hair, one for embroidery, one for the art of simply existing without complaint. The stick before you smokes with the stubborn optimism of plants that learn to be fire. You develop the small crafts of waiting. The first is posture. Not the grand posture you practice for the etiquette matrons, but the quiet one that keeps muscles from mutiny. Knees angled just so, ankles pretending to be decorative, spine unrolling an inch at a time like mercy. The second craft is counting without calling it counting. Tiles, beams, threads in the curtain fringe, scales on the painted carp along the panel. Count to pass the moment, then forget the number so you can start again. The third craft is listening without leaning. Voices are always 2 rooms away here. You learn the dialect of thresholds. Joke 1 arrives to keep you company. If patience were an official post, you'd demand a stipend, a seal, and 3 assistants to help you ignore the clock. A junior maid brings the travel-size water clock, a bronze bowl with a tiny hole, set to float inside a larger basin. As water slips from one to the other, the little bowl sinks like a slow confession. When the rim kisses the surface, the maid lifts it out and empties it, resetting the hour. The clepsydra's shy gurgle is almost a lullaby. 2 sinkings until the summons list, she whispers. You nod as if your life were not measured often by how many times a bowl decides to drown politely. Quirky tidbit surfaces with the next stick of incense. Somewhere in the palace stores they keep maize incense, coils pressed into labyrinthine tracks shaped like dragons or knots. Tiny brass pellets rest at junctions. As fire reaches each pocket, a bead drops into a dish. Chime, 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 so that time announces itself like a courteous guest. You imagine borrowing one shaped like a river, watching the ember wander and the day with it. The summons rosters a rumor sheet until dusk, then a doctrine. Eunuchs pass with bamboo tablets listing names and brushes stiff enough to slice hope. You do not look hopeful. You excel at not looking. The call may not arrive. Often it does not. Historians still argue whether rosters truly rotated with impartial ritual or bent with whim, factions, gifts, and the gravitational pull of the emperor's mood. Manuals insist on fairness. Poems suggest otherwise. Your sleeve contains no opinion, only hands waiting to be told where to fold. A fly arrives to hold an interview with your forehead. You do not flinch because flinching is a memo to the entire room that you still own a nervous system. The fly tires of professionalism and departs. Your maid, sympathetic, fans you once, no more lest the gesture be read as impatience. The palace converts even breezes into documents. Footsteps loosen the corridor. Somewhere a pipa tries a scale, then gives up, deciding silence is the more fashionable key. Your bird, morning thread, emits a single note from the menagerie courtyard, so delicate you picture a needle puncturing a cloud. The note fades. You realize that half the palace's music is the sound of things not happening. Joke 2. You sketch in your mind the job description for court waiter, temporal division. Requirements. Smile that outlives tea, knees that can pass for art, ability to hear your name even when not spoken. The first gang bell whispers evening into acceptance. Lamps kindle down the long verandas like stars, learning to read. A steward pauses at the threshold with a tablet you pretend not to crave. He calls 3 names, not yours. The named women stand with choreographed serenity, attendants rearranging their sleeves into pre-approved hope. The door drinks them. The corridor exhales. The rest of you perform the ritual of pretending you were planning a quiet night anyway. You move to the window lattice and practice quite another craft. Distant looking. Beyond the inner wall, the sky spills into a diluted blue, a wash a painter abandoned for lack of drama. The garden peels into its night logic, crickets sowing, koi keeping their cursive, a cat turning itself into moonlight and ownership. The incense coil on your stand has drawn a sleepy S. You could swear time stifled a yawn. Mainstream fact returns gentler. Within the harem ranks titles, from noble lady up through consort and noble consort, shaped access, allowances, and how often a name appeared on tablets. Even then, senior women sometimes yielded nights to juniors for politics or peace. Somewhere beyond your corridor, bargains are drawn with smiles. You measure yours and decide the corners will endure another hour. You and 2 others wander to the quiet occupations table, a euphemism for tasks designed to use up worries. You polish a hairpin that needed no polishing. You sort tassels by a taxonomy only a bored mind would invent. Weight, arrogance, willingness to tangle. You stitch 3 utterly unnecessary motif knots into the ribbon you traded in the menagerie, thinking of the cat's paw that christened it. When you hold the ribbon at arm's length, the knots look like reasons. The second ging bell drops, and with it a small daring tea, not the bitter green that scolds, but a barley brew that forgives. You sip and are briefly convinced you can taste fields. The maid smiles without showing teeth, the palace way of saying, "We made it to here." A footman passes with the lacquered tray of messages, not love, not treason, just logistics, rehearsal shifts, fabric approvals, a reminder that the lantern racks must be moved before rain. You sign with a brush stab that can be read as graceful if the reader is generous. The maid's eyes ask about the scrap you hid last night. You touch your sleeve where the seam was resewn. Later, your glance says, later's another profession here. Joke 3, you decide to start awarding yourself small medals, invisible ones, for heroic acts of doing nothing. Order of the Immaculate Posture, Cross of the Untouched Complaint, Medal of the Silent Hour. The third ging brings a reverent quiet that feels like velvet laid over the furniture. Somewhere, a eunuch's slippers whisper past in the business of other names. Your chamber absorbs you like a sympathetic throat. You sit by the window again, and the moon finally remembers to look like itself, white, kind, terribly far away. In this long hour, patience alters shape. It's no longer waiting for summons or tea or the next stick of incense to capitulate. It becomes a way of seeing. The unlit lanterns on their rack are moons practicing humility. The unplayed Guchin is a lake that decided not to ripple. The unread scrap under your pillow is a bird folding its wings to dream of flying rather than doing it. You realize, busy with a labor no one will praise. You're holding the day where it will not fall apart. Historians still argue whether such waiting was corrosive or refining. Does stillness erode the self, or does it polish something underneath until it shines? The records don't know. They talk about gowns and dowries and offspring, not about a woman memorizing the pattern of swallows and roof eaves until her breath matches their turn. You let the question hover. Answers would only make noise. When at last the steward returns, late, apologetic by the angle of his bow, you understand without hope what he will say. No further summons tonight. You nod, rise, and the room returns your shape to you like a robe. The maid unpins the heavier ornaments, coaxes your hair down from its careful citadel, and sets your huddian in a dish that catches a last, tired gleam. Powder loosens, your face exhales. You count a final thing, the beat between the last lamp's sigh and the darkness that follows. 1, 2, 3. Then bed. The pillow smells of sachet and secrecy. Morning thread rustles once on his perch. Your ribbon, with its unnecessary knots, lies beside the mattress like a small private river. You breathe, the way the incense taught you, steady, without pleading. In the palace, the sleep is the one summons you can answer without a tablet you accept. You wake to the softest conspiracy, a reed broom whisking the corridor, a kettle beginning to mutter, morning thread testing one note and deciding against heroism. Your maid slips in with water for washing, and that look quietly alight. That means today will contain small weather. Nothing grand. The palace hates thunder it didn't schedule. But a breeze, yes, the sort of breeze that moves screens rather than walls. You rinse, powder, repin, become the lacquered version of yourself again, and tuck the pillow sachet with its cloven osmanthus back under the bedding. The scrap from 2 nights ago, name and place still a riddle, sleeps inside your sewing roll. Waiting teaches you to keep secrets in objects that already know how. You fasten the roll with a neat knot that says habits more loudly than messages. The day begins with dignified errands, a check on lantern racks, a nod to seamstresses plying moonlight into hems, a bow to the dance master who insists your elbow remembers nothing it learned yesterday. But you are really orbiting the small room behind the calligraphy hall, the one with a window that opens onto nothing anyone admits noticing. Your maid has arranged ink practice. You have arranged coincidence. Inside, brushes, water, and inkstone still damp with yesterday's characters, a stack of scrap paper for warming the hand. You warm yours with strokes no one will keep, a forest of plum, a river of listen, a mountain of quiet. Then you slide the fan from your sleeve. It is your ordinary fan, plain silk, bamboo ribs, tassel newly repaired with the 3 unnecessary motif knots you tied last night. Ordinary is the best disguise for meaning. Mainstream fact unfolds with the ribs. Fans were tools of etiquette, flirtation, and temperature, yes, but also portable canvases. Scholars traded verses on them. Artists sent miniatures into the world, flutter by flutter. Court women learned to hold, open, signal. A tilt could be greeting, a shut refusal, a tap on the chin, an arithmetic of maybe. You today intend to stitch one more grammar into that language. Your maid sets the labyrinth incense, one of the maze coils you daydreamed about, on a shallow dish. It burns along a tiny river channel, and every time it reaches a pocket, a brass bead drops. Chime. The sound turns the room into a clock that pretends to be a lullaby. You choose a small brush, thin as mischief, and begin painting along the fan's inner hem where silk meets guard. Not words, those are treason when read the wrong way, but dots. 3, 1, 2, 1. You space them like dew. When the fan is open, no one will think of counting. When it is half open at the exact notch, the points align into the strokes of a name. Not the name on your scrap, that is a flame you won't feed. Instead, you choose a phrase, West Lantern. The rest lives in your sleeve. Joke 1. You murmur to your maid that if etiquette teachers knew how much grammar you've smuggled into fluttering, they'd replace all fans with bricks. She presses her lips together, which is palace for laughter. You close the fan and practice being ordinary with it. Lift, idle figure 8, delicate hide the mouth, benign breeze for a forehead that refuses to glisten. Then, a flick that lands on the dot sequence by habit rather than accident. You feel the small click of intention and set it down, as if you've just taught your hand a poem only the wrist will recite. Next, the paper. You are not fool enough to write names. You draft a poem that would bore the censors into good health. Plum by the west wall, watches lantern smoke climb. Night counts itself. Nothing actionable, nothing thrilling. The secret is not the words, but the brush pressure. Every fifth vertical stroke deeper. Code you learned from a girl who learned it from her aunt, who once knew a man who preferred puzzles to sleep. The deep strokes count numbers. The numbers mark a night, carbon ghosts as calendar. Quirky tidbit taps the rim of your inkstone. Some claim palace chessboards once carried hidden grooves beneath the grid, so a player could slide a bead to a corner and leave a message no one would notice until the board was tilted just so. Your board is paper. Your tilt will be the angle of a fan. You stroll the garden to dry ink. In truth, you are looking for the woman with river green ribbon in her hair, the one who can read a dot without stabbing it. You find her by the koi. She greets you with the correct warmth of yesterday's ally, and you exchange safe remarks about the festival rabbit pounding medicine for insomnia. Then you compliment her ribbon. She bows, and in the bow your fan half opens at the dot notch. Her eyes rest on the hem for one grain of time. She straightens. The West Lantern will be handsome this year, she says to the pond, which is fluent in plausible deniability. You both study fish that will never learn your codes and are therefore trustworthy. Historians still argue whether such micro-messengers ever influence anything larger than the seating at a banquet. Did fans and poems tilt real outcomes, or only taste, tempers, and tea? Records guard their dignity. They swear policy comes from edict, not embroidery. But the palace runs on 100 tiny hinges no edict sees, a maid's route, a steward's preference for lychee over pear, a concubine's choice to cough at the exact moment a dangerous compliment might escape. You, small hinge that you are, turn softly and hear doors shift. By afternoon, you've graduated to a different rebellion, the kind that looks like virtue. You request extra brush practice with a junior concubine who flinches at matrons and drops needles at compliments. You spend the hour letting her erase mistakes without punishment. When she draws a disastrously honest sparrow, you declare it modern and frameworthy. Joke 2, you suggest she invent a school of trembling calligraphy and bill it as spiritual. She breathes for the first time all week. Not all rebellions need codes. Some are just refusals to participate in someone else's meanness. The eunuch steward appears later with a tablet of assignments and a frown that wants witnesses. Inspections will tighten for a few days. Letters weighed, cushions pinched, even candied plums suspect. You nod as if this is weather. Your maid revises your sleeve seams a shade tighter, hemming the sewing roll inside the lining with stitches so tidy even the gods would shrug. You return to the menagerie at the blue hour, when birds think the sky has lost track of itself. Morning thread hops to your finger and tests a phrase that sounds like optimism preheated. You hold the cage still and let the sound tidy your nerves. In the corner, your river green friend pretends to measure millet. Her fan opens, half precisely an echo of your earlier angle. No dots painted, but the tassels knots. 3, 1, 2, 1 mirrored. confirmation without letters. The palace hums on, none the wiser or perfectly aware and unconcerned, because some engines require murmurs to run. At dusk, you walk the long gallery where lantern frames wait like pale ribs. A steward debates wax versus oil across a scroll. You nod at the wisdom of both. When no one looks at your hands, you shift a frame on its rack by one rung. This is not code. This is map. A slightly higher lantern will cast light into a corner, otherwise ignored. A corner where a certain person can stand and see a certain face without sharing the air of a certain rival. You are choreographing shadows now, which is companion art to dancing sleeves. Joke 3 flickers as you pass the cracked floor tile. If the emperor ever asks what you do all day, you'll say, I manage airflow, and let him make of it a philosophy. Night meal arrives and departs with its habitual modesty. In your chamber, the maize incense draws its last bend. Bead, 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 then silence. Your maid unpicks the sleeve, lifts the sewing roll, slides out the poem, and warms its edges over the lamp until the deep strokes rise like a tide only you can see. Third night, she reads in the hush between the cricket syllables. West, a schedule that could mean a lantern lighting, a change of guards, or nothing more than a hope that enjoys precision. Before sleep, you lay the fan on the table, ribs up, ordinary again. You place the calligraphy scrap beneath the tray, then move the tray an inch left so the maid will know you read it and no one else will know there was anything to read. The palace turns and settles. You turn and settle with it, aware that rebellion here is not a banner, but a breath you choose not to surrender. Morning thread rustles once. Your hoodian rests in its dish, a tiny moon waiting to be sunrise. Your ribbon with the unnecessary knots hangs from the bed frame like a tiny river you forgot to worry about. Somewhere, someone is pounding medicine in a painted moon for a story you'll never hear. You will keep making small weather. It is the only climate you're allowed to change. You wake to the softest conspiracy, a reed broom whisking the corridor, a kettle beginning to mutter, morning thread testing one note and deciding against heroism. Your maid slips in with water for washing, and that look quietly alight, that means today will contain small weather. Nothing grand. The palace hates thunder it didn't schedule. But a breeze, yes, the sort of breeze that moves screens rather than walls. You rinse, powder, repin, become the lacquered version of yourself again, and tuck the pillow sachet with its cloven osmanthus back under the bedding. The scrap from 2 nights ago, name and place, still a riddle, sleeps inside your sewing roll. Waiting teaches you to keep secrets in objects that already know how. You fasten the roll with a neat knot that says habits more loudly than messages. The day begins with dignified errands, a check on lantern racks, a nod to seamstresses plying moonlight into hymns, a bow to the dance master who insists your elbow remembers nothing it learned yesterday. But you are really orbiting the small room behind the calligraphy hall, the one with a window that opens onto nothing anyone admits noticing. Your maid has arranged ink practice. You have arranged coincidence. Inside brushes, water, an inkstone still damp with yesterday's characters, a stack of scrap paper for warming the hand. You warm yours with strokes no one will keep, a forest of plum, a river of listen, a mountain of quiet. Then you slide the fan from your sleeve. It is your ordinary fan, plain silk, bamboo ribs, tassel newly repaired with the 3 unnecessary motif knots you tied last night. Ordinary is the best disguise for meaning. Mainstream fact unfolds with the ribs. Fans were tools of etiquette, flirtation, and temperature, yes, but also portable canvases. Scholars traded verses on them. Artists sent miniatures into the world, flutter by flutter. Court women learned to hold open signal. A tilt could be greeting, a shut, refusal, a tap on the chin, an arithmetic of maybe. You today intend to stitch one more grammar into that language. Your maid sets the labyrinth incense, one of the maze coils you daydreamed about, on a shallow dish. It burns along a tiny river channel, and every time it reaches a pocket, a brass bead drops. Chime. The sound turns the room into a clock that pretends to be a lullaby. You choose a small brush, thin as mischief, and begin painting along the fan's inner hem, where silk meets guard. Not words, those are treason when read the wrong way, but dots. 3, 1, 2, 1. You space them like dew. When the fan is open, no one will think of counting. When it is half open at the exact notch, the points align into the strokes of a name, not the name on your scrap. That is a flame you won't feed. Instead, you choose a phrase, West Lantern. The rest lives in your sleeve. Joke 1. You murmur to your maid that if etiquette teachers knew how much grammar you've smuggled into fluttering, they'd replace all fans with bricks. She presses her lips together, which is palace for laughter. You close the fan and practice being ordinary with it. Lift, idle figure 8, delicate hide the mouth, benign breeze for a forehead that refuses to glisten. Then a flick that lands on the dot sequence by habit rather than accident. You feel the small click of intention and set it down, as if you've just taught your hand a poem only the wrist will recite. Next, the paper. You are not fool enough to write names. You draft a poem that would bore the censors into good health. Plumb by the west wall, watches lantern smoke climb. Night counts itself. Nothing actionable, nothing thrilling. The secret is not the words, but the brush pressure. Every fifth vertical stroke, deeper, a code you learned from a girl who learned it from her aunt, who once knew a man who preferred puzzles to sleep. The deep strokes count numbers. The numbers mark a night. Carbon Ghost's calendar. Quirky tidbit taps the rim of your inkstone. Some claim palace chessboards once carried hidden grooves beneath the grid so a player could slide a bead to a corner and leave a message no one would notice until the board was tilted just so. Your board is paper. Your tilt will be the angle of a fan. You stroll the garden to dry ink. In truth, you are looking for the woman with river green ribbon in her hair, the one who can read a dot without stabbing it. You find her by the koi. She greets you with the correct warmth of yesterday's ally, and you exchange safe remarks about the festival rabbit pounding medicine for insomnia. Then you compliment her ribbon. She bows, and in the bow your fan half opens at the dot notch. Her eyes rest on the hem for one grain of time. She straightens. The West Lantern will be handsome this year, she says to the pond, which is fluent in plausible deniability. You both study fish that will never learn your codes and are therefore trustworthy. Historians still argue whether such micro-messengers ever influenced anything larger than the seating at a banquet. Did fans and poems tilt real outcomes, or only taste, tempers, and tea? Records guard their dignity. They swear policy comes from edict, not embroidery. But the palace runs on 100 tiny hinges no edict sees. A maid's route, a steward's preference for lychee over pear, a concubine's choice to cough at the exact moment a dangerous compliment might escape. You, small hinge that you are, turn softly and hear doors shift. By afternoon, you've graduated to a different rebellion, the kind that looks like virtue. You request extra brush practice with a junior concubine who flinches at matrons and drops needles at compliments. You spend the hour letting her erase mistakes without punishment. When she draws a disastrously honest sparrow, you declare it modern and frameworthy. Joke 2. You suggest she invent a school of trembling calligraphy and bill it as spiritual. She breathes for the first time all week. Not all rebellions need codes. Some are just refusals to participate in someone else's meanness. The eunuch steward appears later with a tablet of assignments and a frown that wants witnesses. Inspections will tighten for a few days. Letters weighed, cushions pinched, even candied plums suspect. You nod as if this is weather. Your maid revises your sleeve seams a shade tighter, hemming the sewing roll inside the lining with stitches so tidy even the gods would shrug. You return to the menagerie at the blue hour, when birds think the sky has lost track of itself. Morning thread hops to your finger and tests a phrase that sounds like optimism preheated. You hold the cage still and let the sound tidy your nerves. In the corner, your river green friend pretends to measure millet. Her fan opens, half precisely, an echo of your earlier angle. No dots painted, but the tassels knots, 3, 1, 2, 1 mirrored. Confirmation without letters. The palace hums on, none the wiser or perfectly aware and unconcerned because some engines require murmurs to run. At dusk, you walk the long gallery where lantern frames wait like pale ribs. A steward debates wax versus oil across a scroll. You nod at the wisdom of both. When no one looks at your hands, you shift a frame on its rack by one rung. This is not code. This is map. A slightly higher lantern will cast light into a corner, otherwise ignored. a corner where a certain person can stand and see a certain face without sharing the air of a certain rival. You are choreographing shadows now, which is companion art to dancing sleeves. Joke 3 flickers as you pass the cracked floor tile. If the emperor ever asks what you do all day, you'll say, I manage airflow, and let him make of it a philosophy. Night meal arrives and departs with its habitual modesty. In your chamber, the maize incense draws its last bend, bead, 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 then silence. Your maid unpicks the sleeve, lifts the sewing roll, slides out the poem, and warms its edges over the lamp until the deep strokes rise like a tide only you can see. Third night, she reads in the hush between the cricket syllables, West, a schedule that could mean a lantern lighting, a change of guards, or nothing more than a hope that enjoys precision. Before sleep, you lay the fan on the table, ribs up, ordinary again. You place the calligraphy scrap beneath the tray, then move the tray an inch left so the maid will know you read it and no one else will know there was anything to read. The palace turns and settles. You turn and settle with it, aware that rebellion here is not a banner, but a breath you choose not to surrender. Morning thread rustles once. Your Huadian rests in its dish, a tiny moon waiting to be sunrise. Your ribbon with the unnecessary knots hangs from the bed frame like a tiny river you forgot to worry about. Somewhere, someone is pounding medicine in a painted moon for a story you'll never hear. You will keep making small weather. It is the only climate you're allowed to change. The courtyard whispers of preparation, not for war or festival, but for the quieter battles of affection. You wake to a flutter of fabric and the scent of oils being heated. Tonka bean, clove, sandalwood, all mingling like gossip. A maid brings your brush box, lacquered black, carved with cranes that look far more serene than your morning nerves. Today will be spent at the mirror, not because vanity demands it, but because the mirror is another battlefield. Mainstream fact slides in with the comb. Concubines were expected to master cosmetics as a form of self-presentation, ritual, and even politics. Rouge, powders, and elaborate hairstyles were tools of status and allure. Manuals from dynastic courts detailed not only recipes for pigments, but also the order in which each was to be applied, as though beauty itself were a bureaucracy. You pick up a slender stick of carmine and feel as though you're signing your name on your face. The process begins with rice powder, sifted over skin like snowfall. You close your eyes as the maid pats it across your cheeks, cool and dry, erasing shadows as though the night never happened. Joke 1 drifts in. If only this powder could also erase poor decisions. Half the palace would be radiant saints by now. Next comes the rouge, mixed with honey until it shines like petals in spring. Dabbed onto your lips, it tastes faintly sweet, a secret known only to you and whoever leans close enough. Your cheeks glow, the flush practiced to look accidental. A thin brush lines your brows into gentle arcs, and for a moment you consider the irony of painting serenity onto your forehead while your thoughts scurry like mice. A quirky tidbit hums at the back of your mind. Some recipes for rouge involved crushing cinnabar. Bright and beautiful, yes, but toxic. Women wore loyalty to the emperor on their faces in pigment that could slowly shorten their lives. You lick your lip absent-mindedly, then laugh softly at your own paranoia. The honey, at least, is harmless, and historians still argue whether cinnabar was actually used daily or only for ceremonial brilliance. The mirror tilts, showing your hair half done. Today the choice is the cloud bun, pinned with jade combs shaped like phoenix tails. Each twist requires 3 hands, your maid's your own, and patience borrowed from the gods. She weaves in strands of silk ribbon, pale green, then secures them with tiny gold pins that glint like secrets you're supposed to keep. You sit, spine straight, as she works. The weight grows heavier with each ornament until your head feels like it carries not hair, but a crown of obligations. Joke 2 presses in. You wonder if ancient headaches were not from stress, but from hairpins stubbornly impersonating scaffolding. Once the bun is set, she dusts your temples with pearl powder, a shimmer meant to echo moonlight. You turn, examining the result from 3 angles. It is beautiful, yes, but also faintly theatrical, like wearing a role you didn't audition for, but must now play flawlessly. The finishing touch. Huadian. Those delicate floral motifs applied to the forehead, pressed from paper soaked in pigment or painted freehand. Yours today is a crimson blossom, no larger than a fingernail, but it anchors your face like punctuation at the end of a careful sentence. You smile at the mirror. smiles back, though you're not entirely sure whose smile it is. Historians still argue whether cosmetics in the palace were purely for allure or whether they also functioned as coded signals. Hues worn on particular days, patterns that hinted at mood or allegiance. Watching your maid fold away the brushes, you suspect it was both. Beauty here is never neutral. The morning deepens into afternoon, and your chambers fill with the hum of other concubines arriving to borrow mirrors, swap rouge recipes, or compliment hairpins with compliments that may or may not be sincere. One praises your Huadian too effusively, another asks whether your pearl powder supplier could be shared. You nod politely, storing each request like beads on an abacus. A younger girl struggles with her eyeliner, the black kohl refusing symmetry. You take her brush, steady her hand, and guide the line across her lid. She beams, grateful, and you feel for a moment like an older sister rather than a competitor. Joke 3 wanders through. Perhaps survival here is just learning to keep your eyeliner even under siege. By late day, the mirrors are stacked away, their faces veiled, as though beauty itself requires rest. Your head feels heavy, your skin a canvas that might crack if you sneeze too hard. Yet when you catch sight of yourself reflected in a bronze vase, you pause. The image is striking. Someone worth remembering, worth looking at twice. And maybe that is the point. You are not only yourself, but the version others will see, the version history may sketch vaguely in some dusty scroll. She was lovely. The rouge, the powder, the Huadian, they are your brushstrokes on the palace wall. The lamps are being lit, flames flickering against the painted wood. You rise, careful not to disturb the phoenix combs, and prepare to step back into the corridors where beauty is not decoration but dialogue. Somewhere beyond the mirror's glow, politics waits, hungry for the language written in color and powder. Night folds itself neatly over the palace, tucking in roof lines and smoothing courtyards until they gleam like ink. Lanterns blink one by one into hush, and the long galleries become rivers of amber where your reflection swims and vanishes with each step. You send your attendants away early, easier to think when no one is rehearsing silence for your benefit. The phoenix combs hold. The Huadian is a small comet above your brows, bravely refusing to smudge. You slide open the lattice just enough to let in a thread of cooler air, and there it is, the steady pulse of the night watch, a bell in the distance answering a drum with the patience of old friends. Mainstream fact pads across the threshold with soft feet. The palace night is measured in 5 gang, watches marked by drums and bells, gates barred and unbarred according to the rhythm. Somewhere, timekeepers tend water clocks and incense lines. Watchmen walk with clappers to warn any wandering shadow that it has been noticed. You count without calling it counting. First watch, a sigh. Second, a longer breath. Third, when even cicadas lose interest in their own opinions. Fourth, the coldest hour when quilts become philosophies. Fifth, a whisper of dawn when roosters rehearse. Your room is a small boat rocking on that schedule, moored by custom to a pier you didn't choose. You try sleeping and find you are too well practiced at being awake, so you set about the crafts of wakefulness. You pour barley tea, the steam rising like a patient ghost. You lift your fan and give yourself a whisper of breeze. The dots along its hem, your private alphabet, look innocent in lamplight, as all alphabets do before they're read. Joke 1 pads and wearing slippers. You decide that if insomnia were ranked in the harem, you'd be promoted on seniority alone. Beyond the lattice, the courtyard cools by degrees. A cat, perhaps your moonlight philosopher from the menagerie, crosses the paving stones with the gracious entitlement of something that has never attended an etiquette drill. You tap the sill twice. It pauses, swivels an ear, and decides you are decorative rather than necessary. Its bell gives a comma and disappears into shrubbery. A cricket gourd on your shelf trembles faintly. The little tenant inside tunes itself to the corridor's breath. You set the gourd near the window so its song can negotiate with the watchman's clappers. You stretch the quilt across your knees and sketch constellations through the lattice squares. The pattern is wrong for real stars, but your mind stitches the night sky you can't see. The northern dipper pouring coolness into the world. The weaver and the cowherd considering whether to meet across their river again. The worn track of the moon, rabbit pounding medicine for everyone except the insomniac pounding thoughts. Quirky tidbit alights in your lap. Children in old stories trapped fireflies in gauze to study by their light. A scholar once kept such a glowing net as a lamp during lean years. You imagine yourself pinning a few quiet stars to your wall, no decree against that perhaps, if you called it insect management. From somewhere to the north, the Astronomical Bureau, those roof-line guardians of fate and weather, tends its instruments. You picture a court astronomer bent over a bronze sighting tube, measuring a stubborn star's crossing while a junior assistant sneezes into his sleeve. Historians still argue whether women in the inner court ever climbed those viewing platforms or studied star charts firsthand, or only heard the heavens reported secondhand in the language of lucky days and proper angles. You settle for a compromise. You'll be the observatory of your own room, charting a constellation of shadows, a comet tail of rumors, a moon, a powdered pearl in a dish by your combs. The third watch arrives with a bell that sounds like a question you can't quite hear. You think of the letter hidden, the dots on a fan, the lantern raised one rung higher. You count those too, not victories, more like stitches, enough stitches, and a life holds together. You think of the laundress's invisible patch in your robe. Perhaps the stars are doing the same to the sky when you aren't looking. You consider freedom with the care you reserve for fragile cups. What would it taste like if poured? Fields wind, probably, uneven and rude and delicious. Rice cooked without worrying if someone else prefers millet. A mirror you can walk past without reporting to it. Then you consider the freedoms you do have, smaller but present, the hour you stole for the trembling calligrapher, the ribbon knots that meant patience, the way morning thread sings differently when you offer pear before millet. Joke too nudges you. You suspect your bird is freer than you are, which is distressing given that he travels in a bamboo house with a swing. The watchmen pass, clappers speaking their wooden syllables. You learn their route over months. This one drags a foot on the third stone. That one coughs before turning the corner. Another says the same blessing under his breath each time he crosses the lotus gate. The palace is full of small rituals that never make it into edicts. You say a blessing for them in exchange. May their feet find no rocks. May their belts never catch on your anxiety. You try lying down again. Practice the bathhouse breath. Warm in, slower out. Pretend your pillow is a friendly cloud rather than a bureaucrat with opinions. Your mind is not fooled. It rummages instead in your day. The kingfisher pen that remembered the sky, the ledger smell of ink and orange peel, the way a tassel emergency was averted by an inch. You remember the scent of plum at your pulse, resolve, and nearly laugh at the theatricality of choosing a virtue as if it were perfume. Nearly laughing at night too freely, and the corridor thinks you've invited madness for tea. A bell speaks the fourth watch, thin and cold, as if struck by someone who wishes to be back in bed. You wrap the quilt a little tighter and find yourself walking in memory to the Yakchal Dome from another story. Ice and summer, winter saved underground. You imagine stepping into that cool chamber now, hearing straw rustle, tasting one shard of night on your tongue. The thought is so bright you almost rise to go find the kitchen icebox, only to remember you are a concubine with many skills, and burglary after curfew is none of them. You sit up and light the labyrinth coil, one last little river of fire. Each time a bead drops, chime. You refuse one thought, not forever, just for the space between chimes. Rumor about the note, declined. Imagined conversations scored on invisible scorecards, declined. The weaving maiden's annual commute, temporarily deferred. What remains is what fits between the beads, the feel of silk at your wrist, the soft complaint of a hairpin, the cricket's silk saw, the far-off answer of a bell. For a few breaths, you manage to be a person in a room rather than a diagram in a system. You think of the words you wrote earlier, plumb by the west wall, and how silly, how stubbornly gentle they look against everything they might be asked to hold. You hope the person therefore reads them as weather rather than command, as invitation rather than instruction. Historians still argue whether the inner court's little languages, fans, knots, tassels, half-tilted lanterns, ever changed the large sentences written by men. You think of your friend with the river green ribbon, the steadier elbow of the trembler, the laundress's patch. Large sentences may ignore small ones, but small ones keep people warm. Joke 3 appears uninvited and welcome. You draft, in your head, a polite petition to the Ministry of Sleep. Esteemed sirs, you write, kindly schedule one dream without politics for the undersigned, preferably involving dumplings. You seal it with a yawn that finally remembers how to be heavy. The fifth watch bell is softer, generous as a mother who has learned not to wake the house. Dawn stands behind the eastern screens practicing. You lie back and do not negotiate with your eyelids this time. Morning thread stirs, a fluff becoming a bird, airs one clean note that lands on the rim of your ear like a blessing. The cat, if it was real and not an arrangement your mind invented to keep you company, returns your earlier courtesy by not mewing at your door. You let the night go in the only way it allows, by becoming a different thing. Your Huadian sleeps in its dish, your fan rests with its dots closed like obedient stars. The incense river curves through its last bend. You think of the watchmen handing the palace back to daylight with their clappers like keys, of astronomers putting away constellations like rolled maps. You slide down into the narrow country where you are not painted, not ranked, not waiting for any bell. In that country, someone opens a yakchal and the breath that comes out is enough to cool the whole day. In that country, freedom is simply walking without witnesses. The bead drops one last chime and you go with it, quietly unrecorded, at last asleep. Morning steps into the palace as though it owns the place. Light creeps along the roof tiles, brushing away shadows that clung stubbornly through the fifth watch. You wake not with a start, but with the slow stretch of someone who has negotiated all night and finally signed a truce with sleep. The phoenix combs rest beside you now, their weight gone, your hair softening back into itself. Morning thread chatters as though the entire night was his story to tell, and you are only here to take notes. The first sound outside your chamber is the sweep of brooms. Sand and dust scurry reluctantly into tidy piles as if they too have appointments to keep. Mainstream fact glides in with the broom strokes. Concubines' days often began early, aligning with the rhythms of court duties, prayers, and appearances. While not every woman was summoned daily, each was expected to maintain readiness. You sit upright, spine still remembering yesterday's posture drills, and wonder if readiness can be stored overnight like ice in a yakchal. Breakfast arrives in bowls of rice porridge, steamed buns, and pickled plums. You sip tea, mercifully plain this morning, no rose syrup conspiracies, no secret ice flakes, and let the steam kiss your face awake. Joke one stretches and yawns. You decide that if reincarnation is real, you will come back not as royalty, but as the palace teapot, because at least it's always invited. The courtyard begins to hum with the business of another day. Maids hurry with trays of scrolls and bolts of fabric. Eunuchs bark quiet instructions in tones that suggest order while concealing panic. A bell signals the opening of the outer gates. For you, the day means more practice, more beauty, more invisible negotiations. And yet, as you sip your tea, you notice the faintest trace of yesterday's Huadian blossom on your forehead. It looks like a fading promise, delicate and stubborn. A quirky tidbit drifts across your memory. Some concubines, denied regular audiences, left faint lipstick marks on poems or folded silk as subtle keepsakes for favored friends. These ghost signatures were treasured more than elaborate letters because they carried both intimacy and transience. You tap your lip against the rim of your teacup and wonder how many fingerprints you've already left on the palace that no one has cataloged. The morning proceeds with lessons again. Embroidery, music, perhaps another lecture on the virtues of silence. You smile politely while the tutor drones about filial piety, imagining the crickets outside nodding sagely along. Historians still argue whether these lessons were genuine moral training or simply rehearsals for performance. After all, what is virtue if not stagecraft and silk? You stitch another plum blossom, and the thread hums like a lullaby, less about virtue, more about survival. By mid-afternoon, the palace feels like a beehive warmed by sun. Concubines move along galleries like bees tracing flowers of rank, each with her own rhythm of flattery and defense. You join them, steps measured, face serene. Joke two flickers in. You decide the true national sport of the dynasty is not archery or polo, but keeping a smile exactly 3 shades warmer than indifference. At the pond's edge, koi stir under rippling lotus leaves. Their colors, gold, ivory, vermilion, shift like painted silken water. One flicks its tail, scattering sunlight in fragments. You pause, momentarily freed from etiquette, and feel envy for a fish. They have no calligraphy drills, no tassel codes, no endless rehearsals of patience, just water, food, and the occasional splash of drama. Still, someone will write a poem about them, and they will enter history without ever practicing posture. The day narrows toward evening, lamps being trimmed, corridors scented again with oils. Someone plays the zither nearby, soft notes trembling like dew. You think of all the women who have walked these same paths before you, each convinced her story would matter, each fading into the footnotes of chronicles that list names like incense ash. Quirky thought 3 hovers in, maybe footnotes are the safest place, away from the sharp edges of fame. The final bell of the day resonates through the palace. You return to your chamber, hair unbound, skin bare of powder, and sit by the lattice to watch dusk gather. The courtyard exhales. Cats emerge again, shadows collect in corners, and the first stars rehearse their nightly roles. You think about your place in this great machinery, about the ledger entries of survival, bread, tassels, knots, songs, birds, ribbons, rouge. Each was small, yet together they wove a net that caught you, kept you afloat. You light a single coil of incense, its smoke curling upward like a slow, forgiving thought. The cricket gourd trembles softly, filling the room with a faint, steady music. For a moment, the palace feels almost human, almost kind. Historians still argue whether concubines' lives were gilded cages or theaters of subtle influence. You suspect they were both, and more. Places where women stitched themselves into history with thread too fine to see, but strong enough to last centuries. Joke 3 visits one last time. You imagine some future student falling asleep over a textbook drooling across your name, and you whisper a gentle blessing for their nap. If your boredom could survive to help them sleep, maybe your life has done its work. You close your eyes as the incense burns lower. Tomorrow will arrive with its drills, its combs, its bells, its koi. But tonight, you drift into a quieter ledger, one where your name is written not in ink but in breath. And so, as the palace walls dissolve back into shadow, you are left with only the soft hum of your own heartbeat, steady as the clappers marking night, the painted combs, the braided ribbons, the whispered codes of tassels and fans. They fade one by one like lanterns at dawn. What remains is simpler, the feel of air cool against your skin, the slow rise and fall of your chest, the comfort of knowing that even in a place crowded with rules, there was always a little corner of silence waiting just for you. Let your breath match that silence now. Draw it in as though you are gathering silk, smooth and unhurried. Let it slip out as though you are setting that silk gently aside. Each cycle longer, slower, until the body forgets it ever held tension. The images soften, courtyards blur into patterns of pale stone. A bird sings once, then folds its wings. The koi ripple away into the pond of memory. Even the watchman's bells retreat, growing faint, as if struck from another lifetime. You walk a final lap along the gallery in your mind. Only this time, no one is watching, no rules to recall. The tiles are cool beneath your feet, the air kind, the sky a velvet quilt tucked just for you. The palace sleeps, and with it you. Let yourself follow the last wisp of incense smoke upward and outward, drifting until you are weightless. Let the story rest. Let yourself rest. The night has carried you far enough. Sweet dreams.